Kelleher will be joining at some point. He generally chairs this meeting, but he's not able to join early this morning. Because he'll be late, I'll just chair the whole meeting. So I will pass it to you, Matt.
Matt Cutter, board member.
Catherine Robbins Halsted, board member.
Bob Myers, board member.
Barbara Chapter, board member.
Jim Norris, board member.
Sarah Demers, director of Land for Maine's Future Program.
You would just have staff for the program introduce themselves.
Laura Graham, Land for Maine's Future.
Flora Drury, Land for Maine's Future.
And Jason Boulay, Land for Maine's Future.
Great, and I can't actually see, I believe Commissioner Beal was going to join online, but she thought she might be a couple minutes late. I don't see her initials up there, so I don't think she's joined us yet. So just a reminder for the board to submit your per diem forms if you have them ready to go. Submit them before we leave today. And next item on the agenda is the board minutes. So hopefully folks have had a chance to review the minutes from July 26th. It will be the orange paper in your packet. And I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Any discussion, questions, clarification of the minutes? See any, I will follow Pat's normal form and say, is anybody in opposition to the motion? Raise your hand. Being any, the motion carries. All right, Sarah, I'll pass it over to you for the fund balances.
Great. So I'm going to touch briefly on funds here. We will talk more in depth about them when we get towards allocating, making allocations. This is the big picture overview. The 2009 bond, I highlighted that 174,238. Later today, we will be making farmland awards, and we will use those funds as part of our allocation. So just a reminder on that. You can see at the board's request, we had FY22 and FY23 expenses added to this spreadsheet, so we can see from the 2021 budget allocation how much has been spent in each fiscal year to date. So this gives you an overview of 2009 bond funds, 2011 bond funds, and the new budget allocation. Any questions? Great. Move forward. And as of today, we have a total of 27 active projects. I think that should be 26 active projects if my quick mental math is correct. And we did just recently close on Buck's Ledge, and Place and Preserve is closing imminently this week, next week, Friday. So that one will be done, and Mary Meeting Park is working its way towards probably an early November closing. So that's where we are currently with active projects. And we're going to move into our working lands call for proposals. This slide is just to give you an overview of sort of what we'll be working on today. We've got 3 farmland projects, which total just over 1,300 acres. We've got 4 working waterfront projects you'll hear about today, and 5 working forest projects that you have read those proposals and have scored, and we will go through that scoring process. Map just gives you an idea of where the projects are located.
Okay, so ground rules for farmland and working waterfront presentations. And so just a reminder, the public is welcome to attend. This is a working meeting. Board members may direct questions to the applicant through the chair. And the board will indicate the appropriate time when public comment regarding a proposal may be provided. Reminder, the LMF board is not scoring the working waterfronts or the working farmland proposals. This has been done by DMR and Bureau Ag Forestry appointed review panels. The LMF board selects finalists and makes preliminary funding allocations, and the funding allocations are to be confirmed by the appraisal.
Okay, so before we go into the proposal, hearing about the projects, I just want to remind everyone, this slide should look familiar. You've seen it before. In terms of available funds, this is on a per fiscal year basis. So Farmland has a total of $800,000 available after the all the set asides that the board voted on. And Working Waterfront has $875,000. So this is on a per fiscal year basis. We're working with 2 fiscal years of funding. So for Farmland, that's 1.6 million, and Working Waterfront, that's 1.75 million. Just to sort of set the stage for what we're working with today. And we're gonna go right into it with Alex.
Stand somewhere,
Sure.
anywhere in particular?
Maybe come up so folks who are on Teams can at least see you.
We can pull the
Here we go.
podium,
Yeah, that's
pull the
good.
podium forward too, if you want.
Whatever works, that's fine. Good morning, everybody. My name is Alex Redfield from the Bureau of Agriculture. Happy to talk to you about 3 proposals that were submitted to the Working Farmland Access and Protection Program. We've talked about this program at previous board meetings, so just a quick refresher on where we're at in the process. I'll quickly walk through how the Bureau's review panel assessed the projects, and then give you a little glimpse at the farms that we hope to protect with this funding. We'll probably zip through the presentation itself so that if there is questions from the board, we can give it sufficient time. So,
Alex, would you like to hold this so you can advance your own slides?
sure. It may be harder than.
It's pretty easy.
Oh, yeah,
Just
left
start.
and right.
Yeah.
Great, so. This is the timeline. We put out an initial call for proposals at the beginning of the year and have been sort of proceeding through the process until now. Really excited to have convened a really robust review panel discussion. Barbara was on it, and really enjoyed bringing some expertise in to evaluate all 3 farms that were submitted. We're at the second to last bullet point there, and then we'll proceed through the sort of typical due diligence process, assuming preliminary awards are successful. We evaluated all of the projects based on these criteria. These were adopted by the LMF board in a previous meeting. But the sort of overall summary here is we're trying to protect farms that have the potential to contribute to a more resilient food system in perpetuity. Prioritizing farms that have good bones in terms of natural resources and existing infrastructure, that are located in places where development pressure and threat to conversion is high, and that meet a sort of suite of other bureau and department priorities. And let's talk about some farms. And we'll go through all 3 farms, and if there's a board questions, we can grab them at the end if that works for everybody. So we'll start at Ene Farm in Lisbon, 274 acres. I would say this is a pretty classic central Maine farm with a diversity of soils and natural resources, really strong, abundant water sources, mature and diverse woodlands, previously used for dairy and raising replacement heifers. The landowner this is 100 years in the same family and interested in putting a conservation easement on it to make sure it remains available to agricultural production forever. There was a typo that made it through embarrassingly large number of documents in terms of the budget requests. Just confirming that the numbers here are accurate. It was a $280,000 estimated easement cost, so the request to LMF is $140,000. I think we corrected them in most of the written documents, but just want to reaffirm that's the request. This is a little bit, we included the soils maps here. You can probably see from a distance, the maroon and orange colored areas are soils of prime or statewide importance. There's also a fairly significant amount of soil here that's Buxton silt loam, which is a pretty common grazing soil, so this is a really, this farm is well suited to raising a diversity of livestock enterprises. What we got for Ene, we'll zip down the road to Durham. New Leaf Farm is 74 acres. Sorry, I should have mentioned that all three proposals are submissions from Maine Farmland Trust. All three are seeking to acquire easements on the property, nothing in fee. New Leaf is 74 acres, sort of one of Maine's pioneer diversified vegetable operations, run by Dave and Chris Colson for a long time. The farm at New Leaf abuts a fairly significant amount of conservation land at Runaround Pond in Durham and is just a choice piece of farmland and a really lucrative, in proximity to lucrative markets. So we're excited about how this farm can support high quality production and high yields for a long time to come. Always have been jealous of New Leaf's farm's aquifers that they sit on. They'll be able to grow vegetables in even the driest of years, which is a pretty valuable thing moving forward. You can see here almost all the open land is prime soil or soil of statewide significance. Most of it is the Elmwood series, which is again some of the best cropland for vegetables in Maine. And third, we have Roseberry Farm in Enrichment, which is just under 1,000 acres. It's been in dairy production since I think it's the late 70s, early 80s. The unique thing about this is that it's essentially a self-sufficient dairy operation. No leased acreage, no need to buy and feed. Although the soils are again that Buxton series, which is mostly good for growing grass. There's not a lot of good cropland here. But luckily, grass is what cows eat, so this is going to support dairies or other pastured livestock for a long time. The fact that it's in such close proximity to the 295 corridor and sort of equidistant between Augusta, Brunswick areas and a straight shot to processing operations in southern Maine means that this is again a really well situated property for intensive agricultural production moving forward. Those are the three projects. So obviously a lot more history and personality to each one of the farms, but we got to dig into it at the Bureau review panel in I thought, a really intriguing way. So yeah, happy to entertain board questions.
Before I take questions, I
Sure.
do just want to acknowledge Commissioner Beal has joined us. So Amanda, I
Great.
just want to say hello to the group.
Hi, everybody. Sorry I can't be there in person, but luckily I can be here on Teams.
Okay, board questions for Alex.
Sure.
Yes, good morning, Alex.
Good morning.
Question on Ene Farm.
Yes.
I noticed that they do not have an appraisal. That was an estimate by the applicant. So is that going to be confirmed if they get the allocation? That will be confirmed by appraisal?
All of the easements will have to be confirmed and then reviewed by the appraisals.
Can I ask another question? Okay. New Leaf Farm,
Mhm.
I noticed in the write-up that it said the active farming had stopped in 2014.
Mhm.
While they did still do a small set, which we saw looked good, but
Yep.
is there any concern or do they have hopes for the future of farming on a larger scale? And since it's a farming easement, it's a shame that, they stopped in 2014.
Sure, yeah. Well, I think that current owners are in a very typical situation with a lot of aging Maine farmers. And that they've wrapped up their operation, but want to make sure the land can support active production in the future. So luckily on all three farms, the stewardship has been really exceptional, even if they're not actively producing for market. So most of the ground there is getting leased out to a nearby beef producer. They're keeping some of the choice cropland in rotation and cover crop to try to maintain soil fertility. So I think that's a testament to the landowner's dedication to keeping this in perfect shape by trying to manage the land, even if they're not making much money
Well,
on
they're
it.
not doing it, they're making sure that.
Exactly, it's ready to go.
Maintaining it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
Yeah, can you briefly describe the easements themselves, especially when it comes to making sure that they remain farmland? Is there anything unusual in the easements that we haven't necessarily seen before?
Well, this being the first time I've done this, I'm not entirely sure what you've seen before, but I think the easements follow, well, they'll be written in accordance with the LMF template, which we're still revising to make sure that it's cohesive with Maine Farmland Trust's easement, make sure that there's no surprises as the organization sort of negotiate terms. But they will all essentially ensure that the land is open and available for agricultural production in perpetuity. MFT includes something called an OPAV in their easements, which is an option to purchase at agricultural value, which means that they'll be able to essentially have right of first refusal to purchase a property at agricultural value. And that's sort of boilerplate in all of MFT's easements. That will, I'm sure, be included in the final closing package here. So all of the easements, I believe we're still under final negotiations as they proceeded here. There may be some exclusions for house lots, specifically in the Ene Farm, which potentially could be sold to a group from the Amish community. And so there may be some discussions about how those easements are placed that allow for cultural compatibility. But regardless, the sort of baseline of protecting the ag resources and natural resources that surround them will be present and codified in the easements. Sure.
I think it's important to clarify, Jim, because I know you're familiar with the state's previous OPAV.
Mhm.
For this round, the state will not be holding that Maine Farmland Trust. It's an important policy objective for them to do. So they will be the one holding it rather than the state.
And it'll be clear in there as to what that constitutes, the methodology and so.
Yeah, the methodology has improved in the last 20 years, so it will be the best practice. Yeah.
Commissioner Beal, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I didn't get it up fast enough. I actually just wanted to make a comment based on the question about protecting a farm that isn't being actively farmed right now. As Alex noted, the location of New Leaf Farm is pretty exceptional. They have been serving, major markets for many years, and one of the things I will say, I'm actually at a national conference of state departments of agriculture, and one of the things I'm hearing a lot about here is access to water and the challenges that other states are having. And I can certainly say that even during my time at Maine Farmland Trust, and I believe it's true now, there's a lot of interest from farmers outside the state of Maine who are starting to experience more and more of that pressure. Who have actually picked up and moved their farming operations here. Maine is also seen as a really good place for new and beginning farmers. So we have seen an influx of younger, new farmers coming into the state. And I know Maine Farmland Trust does a lot of good work with their FarmLink program in matching, folks that are looking for land, whether to lease or buy, and get started in farming or get started in Maine. So I think the trend will continue in that direction. So protecting farmland that isn't actively farmed at this moment, and especially when it's a really good farm with lots of excellent attributes, I think it's just a bonus for us here in Maine. I think we will see those farmers coming through different channels as we go forward for a lot of different reasons.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, any other questions for Alex from the board?
Are you ready for a
Oh,
motion?
yes, I am. Yes.
I move that we select the following projects as finalists with a preliminary allocation of $629,500 from LMF Farmland Funds, Ene Farm, New Leaf Farm, Roseberry Farm.
Okay,
Second that.
And second by Bob Myers. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. Is there, I guess since we're here, let's just do it the other way. So that's simpler for me. All those in favor, say aye. Any opposed?
Commissioner Bill did say aye.
Commissioner Beal, that was a affirmative for you, right?
That was an aye. I forgot to unmute.
All right, it's unanimous. Thank you. So applicants will be notified in writing regarding the selection as a finalist in the board's preliminary allocation of LMF funds for the project. Until that time, The board allocations do remain confidential. Applicants may request a verbal report from the director following the end of today's meeting. Okay. Working waterfront, oh, Barbara, yes.
Before we go there, for the convenience of our presenters, so they can put papers and things down, I think it would be nice.
Want the
if we
podium?
moved the
Yeah.
Podium, I think
Thanks,
it would
Ryan.
make it more comfortable.
Yeah. It was here when we left yesterday afternoon. After setting it up. I don't know what happened to it.
Thank you.
There. Okay. Good?
Right.
Right. Hi, everyone. My name's Melissa Bridge, and I'm a senior planner with the Maine Coastal Program in the Maine Department of Marine Resources. And we're going to talk today about the Maine DMR's recommendations for funding for the Working Waterfront Access Protection Program. And first, really quickly, my colleague Hugh Copperthwaite is going to briefly describe the program's impact to date. Enterprises Inc., and they were contracted to help us administer the WAP and have helped with nearly all of the previous rounds as well.
Thanks, Melissa. So I just wanted to show a couple slides just showing the impact of the Working Waterfront Access Protection Program since inception, which CEI helped to initiate this program and build it from the ground up. So thank you for Sarah for inviting me to come today. But since 2006, you can see that the model has worked very well for fishing co-ops, family wharves. We've had a historical society apply a land trust. We have done a few municipal projects, as well as some nonprofits, and then a series of private businesses. And as Melissa said, I think we've had 30 projects to date. 6.5 million in LMF allocations. And it's also, had significant contribution in match. This slide, I know it's a little hard to see, but it's the same data I just showed you, just a little different way of showing it in a pie format, where you can see the allocations are, obviously they're not the same, but it's been a nice mix across the board, protecting in excess of 44 acres of commercial waterfront properties, impacting over 1,000 fishing boats and around 2,000 actual fishermen. So that's all I wanted to share, and just I'll let Melissa present the new projects, but thanks for your support.
Thanks, Hugh. Okay, so I'm just going to talk briefly about how we got to where we are today, and then I'll describe the properties that were recommended for funding. And so we opened up a call for letters of intent in January, and we received 11 letters of intent for potential applicants. Of those, we approved 9 of them to go ahead and write applications because they seemed like a good fit with the WAP program. We ultimately received 5 applications, and they were from the town of Swans Island, the Small Point Development Corporation in Phippsburg, the Evelyn D. LLC property in Harpswell, Meadow Marine Foundation in Yarmouth, and then Union Wharf in Portland. Those 5 applications were sent to our review panel, and they read all of the applications and scored them according to the scoring criteria in the WAP workflow. And then they met in the summer to reach a consensus on the scores for all of the applications. And our review panel has 7 people who are familiar with Maine's marine economy and the marine lending and marine real estate landscapes. And ultimately, they recommended 4 properties for funding: the Swans Island Fish Plant Wharf, the Small Point Development Corporation, Meadow Marine Foundation, and the Evelyn D. LLC property. And their total request was for just over $1.25 million. Now I'll talk about each of them, starting with Meadow Marine Foundation in Yarmouth. So Sea Meadow Marine Foundation is a nonprofit 501c3, and they recently bought the Even Keel Boatyard in Yarmouth. And this is the last exclusively working waterfront property in the Yarmouth Free area. And so the property itself is a bit over 11 acres, but most of it is actually salt marsh. And so most of the activity is clustered in that parking lot with buildings that you can see on the right. And they have just over 2,000 square feet of pier and wharf on this property. So the property provides storage and access for 9 aquaculture companies in Casco Bay. And they employ 34 people and use about 31 boats out of that property. They mostly farm oysters, but also quahogs, scallops, and kelp. The site is also an access point for about 63 wild shellfish fishermen in the Yarmouth and Freeport areas, and they mostly target soft-shell clams, but also worms and green crabs. And Sea Meadow's total request was for $315,000. Just to give you a quick view of that property, you can see the property from the river on the upper left, and then their bulkhead on the right, and some floats and oyster gear that are stored on the property on the bottom. We visited in early spring, so there's a lot more stuff on land than is there throughout the summer. This property also hosts 2 boat building companies, Down East Custom Boat and Green Marine, and it provides limited recreational access for the Yarmouth Rowing Club and locals who want to hand carry kayaks or canoes. If the owners get WAP funding, they will use it to improve their infrastructure and also reduce their overhead by lowering their mortgage amount. And they are going to incorporate plans for climate change and sea level rise as they build those infrastructure upgrades. Moving on to the Small Point Development Corporation in Phippsburg. So this is a jointly owned shareholder corporation that's run by local fishermen and summer/year-round residents, and it's been run that way for about 61 years. And the corporation wanted to enter the WAP because they've been noticing increased real estate pressure in the Phippsburg area, and they want to protect this property and preserve their traditional multi-use harbor. The property itself is actually in 2 parts. It's a total of just over 3.5 acres, and they have about 2 acres down here on land, and that is their pier. And they also have that island. And the island is really important trap storage for the fishermen in this area because there's some space on the property, but it's also really hard to get traps on and off the property because the access road is quite small. So this property is exclusively commercial. And while there are some other commercial properties in Phippsburg, none of them are large enough to accommodate these fishermen if this property were lost. And they have a total of 16 fishermen and 10 crew working out of this site. And they catch lobster, but also pogies, mackerel, tuna, and herring. And several of them are considering incorporating aquaculture in the near future. And their total request was for $412,500. Okay, and so you have a top-down view of the parking lot with their pier on the upper left, and then you can see the float, and then the underside of the pier from the float. And they do stay on top of maintenance and replace pilings and such as needed. The picture on the bottom right shows the island with traps stored on it. If the owners get WAP funding, they will use that funding to improve the infrastructure on the site, particularly by expanding the wharf so more boats can tie up at once, and also by replacing their floats, their winch, and switching to solar power at the site. They're also planning to create an investment fund for future needs. Okay. So next, I'll talk about the Swans Island Fish Plant Wharf. So this is a town-owned property that used to be a salmon aquaculture processing facility. The property itself is 1.6 acres, but most of the working waterfront use is on these 2 chunks here over the water. And this part on the right with the buildings on it has been condemned. And the part on the left is used for trap storage. And it's important because it's one of the only places on the island where fishermen can drive their trucks right down to their boats. The town's goal is to tear down the condemned part and rebuild it so it merges with and strengthens that part on the left. And so the town has some commercial use, but not much because it's in such bad shape. And so the town is hoping to rebuild it to make it far more commercially useful and reduce congestion of the other wharves on the island. However, they're not going to have bait or any kind of buying here, so it won't compete with other businesses on the island. And Swans Island has about 75 fishermen, and most of the 350 year-round families rely on the working waterfront, so it's a priority for the town to maintain this property and get the best use out of it as possible. And they're hoping to land lobsters, but also oysters, scallops, mussels, and kelp at this site. And their total request was for $225,000. As you can see,
There's a little delay.
yeah, I realized so. As you can see, the site is not in the best of shape, and there's really nothing they can do to salvage it. And so the town has put a lot of effort into planning for what they can do to fix this and also how they need to get there. So they've done quite a bit of legwork already. You can see the structure, the failed support beams underneath it, and then trap storage on the not condemned part of the wharf. And if they get WAP funds, they will use those to help them pay for the demolition and reconstruction of this part of the wharf. And they are planning for the new structure to have hoists, floats, berthing, and fresh water. Okay. And then last but not least, I'll talk about the Whidden Lobster Evelyn D. LLC property in Harpswell. So Evelyn D. LLC has a single shareholder, Clayton Whidden. And he's noticed increasing prices and conversion of working waterfronts in the Harpswell area. And so he wants to protect this property and make sure that it stays in commercial use and also remains affordable. And he wants to preserve the heritage and history of commercial fishing and boat building in Harpswell. So there is quite a bit on this property. It's 1.4 acres, but he has a shop, storage, fuel, the wharf, lobster loading and unloading space, bait coolers, I think more bait coolers, and then a boat ramp. And the owner's in the process of rebuilding and raising the wharf. So this lighter colored stuff on the right is new, and he hasn't yet rebuilt that section in the center. And he's rebuilding it in pieces so the wharf can stay working while it's being updated. There are 10 fishermen and about 24 families that rely on this property. And they mostly catch lobsters, but also scallops, crabs, oysters, pogies, and tuna. And their total request was for $312,500. Okay. So you can see the new wharf and the lobster bait cooler there. And this is a view of the newly constructed section of the wharf. And the owner has a lot of experience with working waterfronts and is doing everything he can to make sure that this structure is as solid and long lasting as possible. You can also see a new shop there. And if the owner gets WAP funding, he'll use it to build and expand the bait coolers on the property and also to help build a new shop and a boat ramp. You can see the boat ramp here, and he's planning to get the precast concrete blocks to make a better boat ramp and then build a shop here in the background where that truck thing is. And so the owner is constantly working on improving this property to make it more efficient. And they're hoping that the WAP funds will also help them do that without taking on as much debt. And with that, say thank you. Do you have any questions?
Melissa. I'll just note for the board here that the Small Point project was the one project that we received public comment on. That information was shared with the review board. In mind, and any questions now for Melissa? If not, I would accept a motion.
Well, what is your response to the letter from the Small Point Corporation questioning this project?
I've actually not read it.
Oh, okay.
I think Commissioner Kelleher has read it, but I don't know anything other than that.
Okay. Well, I'll say that it seemed like a substantial, thoughtful letter that raised a lot of questions for me. So I would want to hear some response to it.
I had a question, just,
Yeah.
when they're submitting their applications, is a corporate resolution part of that? Do you have something on record from the corporation that they have authorized the application?
Yes, if it's a share, if it's like a corporation that owns the property. Small
That
Point
was-
did get
that
that.
was the question I had on that.
That it authorizes them to submit the application, and then they will also take a vote prior to closing, authorizing members to sign documents and authorizing the sale and the acceptance of LMF funds. So with any kind of project, whether it's working waterfront or land trust acquisition, we require a board vote prior to closing. So our due diligence process ensures that the authorized individuals have the authority from their corporate structure to move forward with the project.
Because my take was that the person commenting was not currently a member of the board.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Does that address your question, Mark?
I don't know.
I think.
I
Many
guess it
parts-
worries me that, I'd like to know that the committee making the recommendation to us today has seen
Oh, yeah.
that letter
No,
and.
they have.
Commissioner Kelleher
Yes.
for sure has. Yeah.
Okay.
And I would say the majority of the concerns in the letter are addressed by our due diligence process in terms of, is there threat that will be borne out in the appraisal process? The value will be borne out in the appraisal process. So many of our due diligence steps will be those sort of like check-in points of, is the value there? And is the value acceptable to the members? And, is there threat? And how, so I think our process will help to answer many of the questions raised. And it will be check-in points of like, hey, do we want to move forward with this? Is this the value we want to accept or not? So
That's helpful.
I think we'll get those questions answered along the way.
And so then maybe would help, the next step is if we approve this motion, and then what happens next?
What happens next is that all of the applicants then move forward with our process. The first step is the appraisal.
Okay.
And the appraisal tells us what the value is, and the sellers get to decide
If they're still
that
in.
if they're still interested. Yep.
So that might help with everybody's concerns.
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions? Melissa? All right, can somebody move the slide? Perfect. You. Is there a motion?
I move to select the following projects as finalists with a preliminary allocation of $1,265,000 from the LMF Working Waterfront Fund. Meadow Marine Foundation, Small Point Development Corporation, Swans Island Fisherman's Wharf, and Evelyn D. LLC, Witten Lobster.
Second that motion.
There's been a motion and a second. Any discussion on that motion? Not seeing any. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Bye.
Right. It's unanimous. Thank you.
Great. And again,
Same sort of rule applies here. Applicants will be notified in writing regarding the selection as a finalist and the board's preliminary allocation of LMF funds to their project. Until that time, board allocations remain confidential. Applicants may request a verbal report from the director following the interview. So, moving forward.
okay, so we're now moving on to the working forest proposal. So just a reminder, these are the proposals that the board members received, I don't know, a month or so ago. You've read them, you've sent in your preliminary scores. We're going to hear presentations this morning from each of the applicants. You'll have an opportunity to revise your scores if needed, if you hear something new during the presentation. And we will move into a consensus scoring process to get those scores finalized, and executive session to make the selections and reallocations. Okay, so the ground rules, in addition to those that we read for the farmland and working waterfront, some additional ground rules for these proposals are confidential until scored. This prevents undue influence on the board and is in accordance with state of Maine purchasing policies. Scoring is based on the information contained in the proposal. Those here to observe will avoid any actual or appearance of attempts to influence the scoring process. Likewise, board members will refrain from asking questions of the public. This should sound familiar. You've done it a couple times now. We do have conflict of interest language in our statutes. And just a reminder, it's okay to abstain from scoring or participating in the discussion at your discretion. The board will endeavor to stick to the agenda and avoid broader topics that may not relate to the scoring process. The goal for consensus scoring is to ensure fairness and objectivity in the review of proposals and ensure that funds are awarded to the bidders whose proposals best satisfy the criteria of the RFP. That's our LMF workbook. You should have taken notes and you should place your name on your scoring materials and give them to LMF staff at the end of the meeting. You also have this form, which should be in the inside of your packet, which you should fill out and give to me. This is the agreement and disclosure statement. It says that it just certifies that you don't have a personal interest, a financial interest. You haven't helped prepare, and there's no conflict of interest. This is required for state of Maine contracting. When we get into the consensus scoring process, we will remind you of allowed scores. So average scores are not always allowed scores, and we will discuss those scores that had the highest variation. Staff have already prepared that, so we know where to focus the conversation. Just for a reminder for those in the audience, this is our scoring criteria. These are the allowable points. We're going to move into 8-minute presentations with 5 minutes for board question and answer and public comment. For the presentation? Sure. Jim's asking for a break before we go into presentation.
Okay, so before we go into presentations, we'll take just a quick bio break, maybe 3 to 5 minutes, and we'll be back at 9:46 or so.
Oh, perfect. You can do that.
Oh, right. There you go. I can just tell you got the timer. I got the timer. Yes.
Hey, Sarah, how are you? Good to see you.
Yeah.
from BPL, Kirk Siegel from Mahoosic Land Trust, who can't be with us today, Gabe Perkins from Inland Woods and Trails, who's developing and managing the recreational aspects of the property in concert with Mahoosic Land Trust and the Bethel Community Forest. Gabe and Liz will follow me very quickly here. So Chadbourne Tree Farm is one of Maine's premier white pine forest ownerships, assembled over time by the Chadbourne family since they began pine milling in 1634. The family auctioned the property in 2019. The Conservation Fund gathered local land trusts, IF&W, BPL to assess conservation potential. We agreed to take a big risk and submit a bid for all of it. We won the bid and acquired over 15,000 acres, buying time for land trusts and IF&W to secure permanent funding for 30 will eventually buy, and for us, MLT and BPL, nearly 11,000 acres in our LMF proposal. Property is owned by a LLC called White Pine Forest LLC. So BPL was awarded federal forest legacy funding, which requires a 25% match. This LMF proposal is for 1/3 of that required match for BPL's conservation easement purchase. 2/3 of the match will be provided through private funds raised by the Conservation Fund and Mahoosic Land Trust. It's, as you can see, comprised of multiple parcels. This single ownership was strategically assembled over time to include the best white pine sites in the area. Keeping it as a single ownership is critical to managing forest resources at this scale. The actual headwaters of the Crooked River, primary tributary to Sebago Lake and Portland's water supply, is on the property. The land includes 27 miles of streams, including the Androscoggin River, one of the East's most renowned rock climbing pitches at Tumbledown Dick Mountain that MLT will manage, and high quality natural communities not yet in the MNAP database. The Chadbourne Tree Farm parcels form the anchors for large forest habitat blocks in the area. There's a map to that effect in your application. I also draw your attention to the map, the 30th page of your application, to see how important this property is to the area's recreational assets. The Gabe will describe how the long-sought Chadbourne lands are the missing puzzle pieces for connectivity for the growing recreational economy in the Bethel region. Gabe.
You can do that. Tom, thanks, everybody. Great to see you all this morning. Yeah, this opportunity came around just a week after we closed and opened the Bethel Community Forest, which LMF supported back in 2018. About a week later, we found out that this property was for sale and at this scale that it's only going to take, we thought this was going to take forever to make an interconnected trail system between Mount Abram, Bethel Village, the schools, and Sunday River. The support to purchase the Bethel Community Forest originally was imperative to make that northerly section complete. And then not 1 week later, this comes up and we're like, okay, now we've got to convince Tom and friends to help us purchase this, because this is a community held goal for this interconnected multiple use recreational trail system. This was identified 20 years ago. And so now here we are to be able to do this. It connects, Mount Abram with permanent protected access. We have access through Bethel Village on town streets and on multi-use pathways, and then on up into the Bethel Community Forest into Sunday River. This also does something really interesting where it creates sort of an emerald necklace around Bethel. It protects and protects the aesthetics of the community that we've all known and loved for generations, but also creates that opportunity for enhanced recreation in a year-round capacity. We're really known for winter. That's changing subtly with us here, but this is a once in 12 generations opportunity. This is not a once in a generation. We sat on this thing forever and wondered what was going to happen, and now we have this really amazing opportunity with your support to make this durable and permanent and enhance the year-round economic viability through outdoor recreation.
Just to kind of
Thank you, Judy. Well, I think you left me with all the time, so. I'll go
By
for it.
design.
I just wanted to share that the Bureau is really excited to be involved with this project. We do a lot of projects on working landscapes across the North Woods that are very important, but this is a really unique opportunity to protect a working landscape that's really the backdrop of a community. It's the view that people see while they're out running errands. It's the land that links the trails that they're using. And it's a really important piece of their local economy, both for forest products and then the growing four-season recreational economy in the Bethel region. And I think the uniqueness of this project is something that really was important to the Bureau and also really resonated with our State Forest Legacy Advisory Committee. It was just something different than we usually do for forest legacy projects. Over the past few months, all of the partners have been getting together regularly to develop the key provisions of the conservation easement. So there's a lot going on. It's you know, a lot of parcels, and they all have different and unique features to them. Something that kind of scared me initially as a professional easement monitor, but I think the more I've gotten to know the individual parcels and kind of how these lay on the landscape and relate to one another, the more I appreciate and all of the values of this project. So some of the key terms will include special protections for significant streams and habitats. As Tom mentioned, there's not a lot of existing MNAP information for this property. They hadn't been out prior, but have been doing some field work this summer. In terms of the recreation, the easement will be providing affirmative rights to the state to secure those key recreational opportunities and trail linkages. And that's important, right? Easements can kind of allow general use for recreation, but this will provide specific rights to the state to develop in partnership with inland woods and trails, those important recreational amenities. As holder of the easement, the Bureau will be responsible for ongoing monitoring and enforcement. We hold 60 easements on just about 400,000 acres across the state. As part of our most recent Forest Legacy audit, the Bureau was commended for exceptional capacity for conservation easement stewardship. And we will bring that in this project as well. And that includes robust community foundation endowments, as well as a full-time stewardship specialist who's responsible for monitoring and stewardship. LMF funding is really critical to this project. It's the final piece of the funding puzzle. As Tom mentioned, we have really substantial support from Forest Legacy and private philanthropy. I know $1 million is a lot of money. It represents under 10% of the total project budget. So it's small in terms of the whole project budget, but really critical funding for us to bring this project to closing. And so thank you. Jim?
Yeah, in terms of the before and after values, the easement values, is this going to be an appraisal of each and every one of them because of the difference between conditions of the easement, or is there enough similarity between the easements to allow you to do an appraisal that reflects it?
So it'll be one easement across the entire landscape, and it will only allow for one division. So the, there was a map up there. There's about 800 acres, the Tumble Down Dick parcel, that will be owned in fee by Mahoosuc Land Trust. All of the rest of the land will be under one ownership.
And so there won't be any major variety in terms of the conditions in the easement for one property to the next.
No, I mean, certain tracks will have like a right to build a trail or have some recreational improvements, but otherwise the provisions will apply across the whole landscape.
And so will the appraiser have an opportunity to reflect some of those minor differences, or do you anticipate that they're so somewhat insignificant and won't have a?
I have learned not to stick my nose into those issues with regards to appraisal.
Up to the appraisers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Barbara?
Can you just explain the ownership of the parcels versus the easement that BPL would hold? And at one point in the proposal, it said that the Conservation Trust will, the landowner, which is White Pine, will market restricted property for sale. So I'm wondering what that means and just who's gonna own this that you're gonna have the easement on.
Yeah, so Conservation Fund bought the property and immediately conveyed it into an LLC, primarily because there is another nonprofit that provided some of our temporary capital to buy this. This is a very expensive piece of property. And so we leveraged another nonprofit. So we together formed this LLC called White Pine Forest LLC. So that is the landowner. And by design, these working forest conservation easement projects, the original intent here was to keep it in private hands, with the exception of the Mahoosic Land Trust piece in Gilead. Put the conservation easement on it, then the whole property goes as one chunk back into the marketplace, conserved with the conservation easement, similar to all of our other working forest conservation easements around the state.
And Tom, who do you think would be likely buyers for this? Are we talking about a forest products company or someone who intends to do sustainable forestry, which I assume would
They will
be
be
allowed?
required to do that. Yeah, it's very interesting. Good question. This is different than sort of northern Maine, sort of old paper company land. This is quite extraordinary. And we've already had lots of inquiries from pine milling companies, from families, from other nonprofits, from timber investors. It's going to be sort of running the gamut there, but the crux of it is that the resource will be protected. So it, in the end, like our other conservation easements, will not really matter who actually the owner is. There is a lot of local interest. There might even be a local bid to put it, to put it together. Who knows?
And your intent, aside from what goes to Mahoosic Land Trust, would be the rest would be sold as a unit. You won't be breaking it up.
It can't be. The easement will be one, the easement will prevent any breakup of that. And the reason for that is, as I mentioned, these lands were strategically assembled to create a whole and to provide a robust, permanent source of essentially white pine, red oak, into the sawmilling industries local. There's also pulp that comes off and other forest products, but it hangs together that way. And when you have an opportunity to keep something that's been managed as a whole, that's what we should be doing in landscape scale forest conservation.
Yeah, can you just clarify when you're expecting the transfer to happen to Mahoosic Land Trust?
Yeah, so probably the day or two after the conservation easement is conveyed, MLT will step into ownership of this. They've essentially, other than their obligation for some of this match, they've raised their funds and ready to go.
Any other questions, Barbara?
This is fairly complex. The appraisal looks like it will be fairly complex. I'm just wondering if you have any sense of a potential closing date for this.
So as this is a forest legacy project and so has pretty complicated due diligence and appraisal requirements. This project will be, we have to do an appraisal and a review appraisal, and this will be reviewed by Forest Service staff. So that lengthens our timeline a little bit. We're in the process of, we've, based on our meetings regarding the easement, we've put together a draft conservation plan, which we've shared with LMF staff. And so next step is getting that into the conservation easement format. And so we need to finalize that and then our title review, which is already underway before the appraisal process can kick off with the Forest Service. So we're hopeful in the spring that would be finalized. So looking
Next spring,
next spring.
You could close potentially.
Or the appraisal would
The
be
appraisal.
finished.
So I'm just wondering if we're talking about fiscal 24
Mhm.
probably for closing. Is that realistic? So it would be after June 30th of next year. Is that what you're
And then
thinking with all the due
Barbara,
diligence?
Probably.
Probably.
Well, I don't, my partners would like it to be in February, but, the realism of the.
Sooner the better, but we're dealing with the Forest Service.
Right.
The US Forest Service.
Great, thank you all. Any other questions?
Excellent. Thank you.
Next up, who is presenting for Kennebago? All right, so just so you know, we will be keeping track, and when you hear that buzzer, I'll try to give you a 3 and a 1 minute kind of verbal, what hand signs. Yeah.
We've got a 1 minute warning that comes up and it will probably be
Easier
easier
to see it.
for you to see if you stand like that.
And so.
So where do I see it?
Clock goes off.
On the slide.
Oh, on the slide.
The 1
Staff
minute
will,
warning.
staff will.
Somewhere down.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, say 1 minute. and I'll give you
4
some-
minutes, and then you'll get, in 7 minutes, you get a 1 minute warning.
Great, okay. Well, I am gonna to try and keep myself on track. I've got things written down too, so I may kind of read through things. So I'm Nancy Perlson. I'm here representing Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust. I've been around with you guys for a lot of years. This is part of an exciting new project that the Heritage Trust has been working on called the Kennebago Headwaters Project. And we have come to you previously with an earlier project, and this is the next phase of this project. This particular project will be the fee acquisition of over 5,000 acres. The entire project is just over 10,000 acres, a good chunk of the headwaters, upper headwaters of the Kennebago River. The Kennebago is one of 5 watersheds in Maine that's been identified by the Nature Conservancy as having long connected stream networks, unaltered water flow, and intact riparian forested areas supporting a diverse array of native species. The primary one that we're talking about of importance here is brook trout, and that's an extraordinary quality and considered this area and the state of Maine in general are considered one of the last true strongholds for wild native brook trout in their entire eastern range. So that's the kind of the dominant value of this project. The Maine Rivers Act has recognized the Kennebago River and its tributaries, which are an important part of this project, as one of the state's most significant resources for brook trout and landlocked salmon habitat. It also provides integral spawning habitat it's a tributary to Little Kennebago Lake, and Mooselook-Meguntic Lake, which you see downstream. The Kennebago Headwaters parcel has 4 major tributaries to the Kennebago, which don't really show up at that scale, but Bear Brook, Wiggle Brook, Otter Brook, and Saul Brook. And they channel the cold waters from the higher elevations, which also don't show here very well, but there's a lot of high elevation land that's a part of this property. And they channel that cold water into the main stem of the river, providing the cold water habitat the brook trout need. Buffering riparian areas and restocking the forest is going to have significant benefits for the wildlife species in addition to brook trout. The watershed is at the heart of Audubon's globally important birding area, and we have documented sightings of the rusty blackbird, which is a priority 1 species of greatest conservation need. And it's also on the IUCN red list as vulnerable to extirpation. So that's an important additional species. The Maine Natural Areas Program has recently done some work out there, and we're going to continue doing more field work shortly in the next season. One of the things that's been identified here also is the roaring brook mayfly, which is also a priority 1 species. The other important value that you can see here is that this adds to over 60,000 acres of additional conservation in this region, not just additional, but adjoining, abutting, in addition to all the other kind of patchwork of conservation that you see there. The property also attracts anglers from across the country and even internationally, and the project will protect public access for a variety of recreational uses, including fishing, hunting, hiking, bird watching, paddling. As far as readiness, the project is under contract. We're scheduled to close by June 30th of this upcoming year. with the opportunity, hopefully not, to extend that contract to December 5th. So fingers crossed, we can pull all our resources together and get this done fairly quickly. We've completed our environmental site assessment, and we have a draft survey, and we've engaged an appraiser, expecting to have that work done by the end of this year or early in next year. As far as access, we have obtained direct public access rights from the current landowner across their retained lands, and we've been assigned public access or access rights across other lands out to a public way. So it's a huge enhancement to the public access for this property. Strategically, in addition, you can see the conservation that surrounds it. But the project also aligns with the wildlands, woodlands, farmlands, and community future vision for New England, which looks to conserve large tracts of forest land across New England. And in order to achieve that, we're going to have some large tracts of land like this to reach that goal. Combined with the wildlands. So we started out calling these by names and phases, and it got really confusing with numbers like track 1, track 2, track 3. So we're now calling them the wildlands and the woodlands. So the woodlands is the one that you've done previously, which is kind of down in here, doesn't show up as an outline here. That's the wildlands. This is what we're now calling the woodlands. So track 2, track 1, woodlands or wildlands, woodlands. So that's kind of also adding to that balance between the wildlands, woodlands concept, where the larger tract is going to be managed for forest products. And the wildlands tract is mostly going to be not actively managed for forestry. Western Maine provides more optimal conditions for native brook trout with fewer competing non-native species than southern and coastal parts of the state. The other asset we have here is the elevation and the forest cover from the surrounding uplands, which protect the tributaries and the watershed and contribute to the clear, cold waters, which brook trout require in the face of increased temperature and as a result of climate change. So that's the other asset this property brings, is the ability to protect and manage these uplands in the face of climate change to really protect that cold water fishery. The other thing that I think is important here, and it's part of your LMF scoring process, is the river system concept. So this is part of a whole watershed goal. And with the acquisition of this piece of property, we will have now conserved, or with other partners, conserved almost the entire Kennebago watershed. So a significant watershed. The property is going to be managed as working forest, but we're going to define special areas, particularly around riparian areas. As I mentioned, there are 4 significant tributary streams. There are also some special areas that have been identified by the Maine Natural Areas Program, and we're doing more field work in the upcoming season. We are going to be working with a forest ecologist to help us do this management plan. So we're really looking to emphasize biodiversity and climate resilience in our management of this project. That the end?
Time.
Oh, my, okay. All right. The last, I think 2 quick things, if I could say them. We have gotten $1 million+ from the federal government to do some stream restoration work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Joint Brook Trout Venture. So we're going to be doing actual restoration work on the river, upstream, tributaries, all of that. And then the other issue here, I think, is threat. This is part of the Rangeley Lakes region. We've seen a huge uptick in interest for development, kingdom lots, that kind of thing, particularly in the last 2 years. So the pressure is significant on this property. Stand back so I can see everybody. Yes.
Couple of questions, but the first one, is there any carbon credit sequestration plans?
The Heritage Trust is looking at that. They've been in discussions with outfits like Blue Source, for example, who's done an evaluation on their existing lands. We've talked about new lands. And so that is in discussions, yes.
Second question, as you recall, we had serious concerns about accessibility. During
Yes.
Earlier discussions,
Yep.
and you've made it a little clearer, but
Yep.
it still seems like a bit of a tough go as far as public getting
Mhm.
access to.
So
Is there any chance for some improvement beyond what you've identified here today?
in terms of rights or in terms of the physical access?
Physical access.
Yeah, so we have applied for and gotten some funding from Franklin County, which has a TIF program for projects that contribute to economic development in the county. Only can be used in unorganized territories, so it was a good fit for this project. So we've gotten some funding from them to make some improvements to the recreational infrastructure, parking, signs, some possible road work. We hope to use some LMF, access funding to help with that. So we plan to make some improvements to the infrastructure, yes. And one of the things about this is it's not an easy place to get to. That's part of why it's still remained, I think, as special a place as it has. But that said, the trust has been putting out counters in different places. And I can tell you that there are thousands of people that manage to get there in spite of the fact that it takes a commitment. It's a long road off of a paved road to get there, but the value of what you get when you get there is apparently worth it because they're coming. Yeah.
Furthering on this access issue, this project access map that you provided in your proposal implies that the Grants Camp Road you have right of way over that, is that?
So all these roads have different names. So there's the Kennebago River Road, also known as the Canada Road.
Yeah.
There's the Kennebago River Road, which sometimes people call the Grants Camp Road. So there's a road, the Kennebago River Road comes in off of Route 16 and from the south and goes up and eventually comes to Grants Camps. Then there are other roads, the Morton Cutoff Road and the Lincoln Pond Road that come in further up on Route 16 and come in north of Big Kennebago Lake. The Kennebago Road, AKA Grants Camp Road, to the south has a gate on it. So that has limited access. The state of Maine owns a piece of property on that lake, leases to the Grants Camps. And so there's an opportunity for the public to come in that way. There's 3 parking spots there. If you can come in and get one of those 3 parking spots, you can come in that way. But we have ungated access farther up on Route 16 that comes in on the Morton Cutoff and the Lincoln Pond Road. So yeah, there are some limitations to the south.
Does this current proposal do anything to improve the access over the proposal that we approved earlier this year?
I think the access here is the same as the access for that one. Yeah, the legal access, the physical access, like I say, we're going to intend to make some improvements, but.
Thanks.
Barbara?
Nancy,
Yes.
I'm still interested in access.
Yes, sure, yes.
So did I hear you just say that the gate that's on Grants Pond Road, you can get permission to go through it to these 3 parking spots?
Correct, yes. So
And
there,
how
I
do you
believe
get-
it's this, I think it's, I'm not sure who, I'm sure it's IF&W or BPL, it might be BPL, has an agreement, because that's on state of Maine leased land that the public should be able to access it. So there is a gatehouse at the gate on the southern end, and you can come in and say, I'm here, I'd like to park in one of those spots at Grants Camp and go fishing. Or whatever you want to do up there, and you can do that. But I don't know that you can reserve it. I think it's kind of you show up and
So is
you're
that-
one of the first 3 to show up that day.
There's a person who is.
There's a gatekeeper that's there.
It's a gatekeeper
Yep.
situation. Where on the Grants Camp Road is that?
It's very close off of Route 16.
Very
So when you
close. And
just
then you would
just
have-
get off, then you got a long ride in, but
then
yeah.
you would have free access on the
Correct.
way in. And who owns that road? The state doesn't own that.
No, that's owned by the landowners. Most of that is owned by 7 Islands.
7 Islands.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the gate,
Lincoln Pond Road, no gates.
correct,
Lincoln Pond Road, no gates.
correct.
And then you own this little red section of roads
Yes,
I'm seeing
with
here.
the previous acquisition, the one that we had another application. We own now a piece of the Lincoln Pond Road. That's the southern boundary of that property. And on the current proposal, we'll own the Lincoln Pond Road. That's the southern boundary of this proposal. So we'll actually own some pieces of the Lincoln Pond Road along with other large timberland owners
And
who own other pieces.
And in terms of access, again, it's nice to hear that you're talking about some infrastructure improvements because just getting there is only half of it.
Yes.
Then if you want to go birding, you've got to have access to some kind of a trail if you want
Yes.
to go hiking.
Yes.
So West Kennebago, for example, is accessed over this, but is there currently a trailhead or would you
There
be
is.
envisioning it?
There is the trailhead for West Kennebago Mountain, which is a popular hiking trail. The mountain is off of the property. The trailhead is on the property.
Okay,
So we'll
it's
be doing some
currently there.
improvements to that trailhead. Yes, there's parking and a trailhead there.
And would you be using existing logging roads and things as opposed possible birding trails?
Yes, there are, as you can imagine, it's an active managed forest. So there are a fair number of logging roads, mostly nicely, I guess, in terms of recreation anyway, not necessarily good for resource protection, but they tend to follow the streams. So, there's Wiggle Brook and then there's the Wiggle Brook Road and there's Bear Brook and there's the Bear Brook Road. A lot of those need some improvement and we've already made some improvements, primarily for resource protection. And with this stream restoration money, a focus will be roads and culverts. So it'll kind of be a good side benefit of the improvements for resource protection will be probably the improvements of those roads. Yeah. Yeah, there's really a great network of access interior to the property too. It just needs some work. There's places where you might not want to take your passenger car right now.
So one of the things that we score these projects on is the naturalness of the
Yes.
Property. Been on Kennebago, I have observed some of Beirut's forestry practices. And so it's hard for me to assess the naturalness of this property. Are there clear cuts? What would you say the condition really is?
Yeah, I mean, it's been managed as part of the commercial, forestry resource since it was paper company land. And I think the current landowners have perhaps been a little more aggressive. So I don't think there's any major clear cuts on this piece. There's some very near it, just on the eastern side of it. We do have an agreement with the landowner that there won't be now that we've signed a contract, there won't be any more cutting now until we close. So there will not be any additional cutting. There are, however, on this property, and Maine Natural Area Program explored some of those areas because of the high elevations. There are some areas that are really quite untouched. And then the riparian areas along the water resources, because of state regulations, are fairly natural. So there are some key patches of pretty natural, very special, in fact, some almost old growth in the more difficult to get to, obviously, areas. But we do intend to really kind of try and reverse that trend and really work toward biodiversity and carbon storage. So we hope we will restore some of that land that's maybe not so natural now.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, moving on to Mill Hill and Edward Mill Forest.
And as we get set up here, I do just want to mention that Catherine noticed an error in your summary form. So the correct budget, the error was with the budget. The correct budget is here on the slide.
For the Mill Hill.
Start my Strava now. Good morning, everybody. My name's Lee Dassler. I'm the Executive Director of the Western Foothills Land Trust. And I'm here to present the largest proposal we've ever presented to Land for Maine's Future Board for 2 adjoining properties. And one is called Edwards Mills. It's now just recently been surveyed. We thought it was 720 acres. It's 703 acres. on the east side of the Crooked River in Norway and Otisfield, Norway and Harrison. And then there's a larger property, 1,293 acres, called Mill Hill Forest on the west side of the Crooked River. So we're presenting these as one package. They probably will logically end up as a two-phase project. The Edwards Mills Forest is readier for completion than the Mill Hill Forest project. So we've been involved, the Western Foothills Land Trust has been involved in protecting lands in the Crooked River watershed since about 2005 is when it first started to rise up in our waters. And in 2007, a nascent organization called the Upland Headwaters was formed to think about protecting the Crooked River watershed. Greater Lovell Land Trust, Mahoosic Land Trust, Western Foothills Land Trust, Luneco, a little bit of Portland Water District energy coming in. But nothing really happened until about 2017 when this all congealed into an entity called Sebago Clean Waters, which is a partnership of 10 organizations committed to protecting the Sebago Lake watershed for the water quality of drinking water quality for over 1/6 of Maine, the greater Portland Water District community. So we are part of that entity and devoted to protecting the Crooked River watershed. Both of these properties embrace the Crooked River. Will be 3 miles of Crooked River frontage protected by this acquisition. There will be 3 miles of tributary waters, streams protected by this acquisition, all brook trout habitat. And Nancy was just going on eloquently about the importance of brook trout, so I don't need to repeat that. But Maine is really noted for its brook trout habitat as a draw for fishermen from all over. The other piece that the Crooked River provides in terms of fisheries values is it is the only, it is the nursery for the indigenous Sebago landlocked salmon. Of all the tribs that go into Sebago Lake, the Crooked River is the only one where the native landlocked salmon will spawn. So it's 60 miles of glorious habitat for landlocked salmon. There's actually a 2-mile stretch just a little bit north of these properties that is the epicenter of that particular nursery. These came about in part because of Tom Duffus sitting in this room over here. So in 2019, there was the Chadbourne Tree Farm lands were put up for potential bid or for bid sale. And the conservation funds started calling us. We heard from this guy named Tom Duffus we'd never heard of before. Would you be interested in purchasing from us any of these Chadbourne Tree Farm parcels in your region? Were we, the conservation fund, to successfully purchase them? And we said yes. And this one, the Edwards Mills property, the one on the east side, was a Chadbourne Tree Farm parcel. And it was right on the Crooked River. It was also adjacent to an LMF project that we had purchased, I think in 2007, I think is when we did it, maybe later. Is during the LePage administration is when it finally closed. It's called Twin Bridges Preserve. It's 252 acres with 5 miles of recreational trails, a wonderful, wonderful preserve. It's just south of this, the potential conserved portions that we're looking at here. The Twin Bridges runs, it's hard to see on the map, but it runs on both north and south sides of Route 117. So these parcels are contiguous with it.
You can see it now.
Fabulous. There you go. Okay, so you can see the green parcel that's contiguous with it. So we already protected that. Here was an additional Chadbourne Tree Farm parcel to add to it. And then, so we continue to negotiate with the Conservation Fund for Edwards Mills. And then out of the greater Sebago Clean Waters community, there was an opportunity to have a discussion with a private landowner. And all of us in conservation know the importance of this, of having an invitation into a household that you've always wanted to get into. And in this case, it was Sharon and Davis Kimball in Waterford. The Kimballs are the largest landowners in Waterford. And they were willing to talk to us about the potential purchase of 1,200 acres that they owned. It's actually 1,293 acres. This is 1/10 of their holding of Waterford and holdings in Waterford, excuse me. And what a thrill. And what wonderful people. Every time I've gone to meet them in their home, I've walked away with a vegetable that they have grown. A gorgeous onion or a few cucumbers. They're just salt of the earth, wonderful people who love their forests and want to see them protected as working forests as best possible. They've never dealt with conservation transactions before. This is their first round. So it is our hope as a land trust to make this as easy and painless for them as possible. It's gorgeous land. We were actually, because of the Conservation Fund, we started a conversation with Betsy Ham at Maine Coast Heritage Trust, and we were involved in Maine Coast Heritage Trust's sort of joint NACA application, which has just recently been approved. So we will be receiving $700,000 through the North American Wetlands Conservation Act for the purchase of the Mill Hill Forest parcel. So that monies we knew we had. We looked forward to the potential of Land for Maine's future money from this board. The other opportunity for us to get a large sum would be from the U.S. Forest Service Community Forest Fund, which can provide up to $600,000. We'll be applying to that this coming January. Open Space Institute, or in their Appalachian Landscapes Fund for the climate resiliency factors of both of these properties. Both have received funding. And there's some smaller funding sources. Oh, and not a smaller funding source would be the Portland Water District, which has been very generous with any sort of conservation funding within the watershed. 1 minute remaining. As I approach that finish line, we would have, there's snowmobile trails on this property. We will work with the snowmobile club to continue that access. Both landowners have not allowed ATV access on their properties because of complications with forest management. We would like to continue that and not have ATVs on these lands. We will transition the existing working forest logging roads and trails into non-motorized trails. And we hold the potential on Edwards Mills property of possibly using this for periodic equine activities. The geology there, the trail composition, the topography is quite good for equine opportunities. I think in terms of management, we'd make it very distinct opportunities, maybe twice a year events. I'm done. Thank you.
Any questions from the board?
Thank you, Lee. I wondered how the towns of Norway, Waterford, Harrison, and Otisville feel about your proposal. Have you had conversations with?
Have had conversations with all of them. We pay, I think similar to most land trusts in Maine, we do pay taxes. So this land has been under, let me take that back. The Edwards Mills has not been under, Tom, correct me, has not been under tree growth. I think that one, we will be switching that into tree growth. So they will experience a little bit of a decline in income there. And Mill Hill has been under tree growth taxation with the Kimball family, and we will maintain that. So in terms of economies, the towns will not experience any detrimental effects. They will experience increased recreational values, and all the towns recognize the importance of the Crooked River in terms of its resources and habitat, and for those values to their communities.
So they're well aware of your proposal, and you would say they're supportive?
Yes, yes.
So if tree growth's involved effectively in both parcels from here on out, and the commercial management aspects of tree growth are, you folks are well aware of it and going to make sure that those kinds of considerations are made for the property, I take it.
And balancing the resources. So for example, with Edwards Mills, there's a section in the northeast quadrant of the northern portion of the property that we would sort of allocate as that's where we would do commercial forestry. It's about 100 acres. It's far away from the wetlands, far away from the tributaries, and of course, far away from the Crooked River. Mill Hill Forest is a much different beast. The eastern portion of Mill Hill Forest is where all the incredible wetlands are on that particular property. And there's over 2 miles of streams, and it's mostly on the eastern portion. The high western portion is where we would be looking at forest management.
So as far as the two properties are concerned, there's a lot of non-forest
Mhm.
property included in the overall acreage.
Correct.
That's not affected by the commercial aspect of.
Correct. We would be very careful about that. This is being put forward by Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. This is about resource protection primarily.
Are you likely to make modifications to that? You know, let's say it's 50% forested. Revise those, given who you are versus who had it, so that.
It would be a much different forest practices, especially on Edwards Mills, yeah.
But even in terms of overall size, you know, could it be that from here on out, instead of 50% forest land classified it under tree growth, that it might be something other than that, that would
I
affect?
mean, we could classify it, change it over so that it's 50% open space and then just a portion of a tree growth. Yes, we could look at that. And that just wasn't something that the previous owners ever did. Chadbourne had it in as a working forest land, and Davis Kimball has it as a working forest. Good question. Thank you.
Lee, when you say you're halfway to reaching your goal of protecting 25% of the Sebago Lake watershed,
We're nearly there. Yeah,
is this a part of?
it is. So the goal is to protect an additional 35,000 acres before 2035, I think. Yeah. And we're at about 12,000 acres now. So this will get us another 2,000 in a single.
This is additive to the.
It would be additive, yes.
The Edward Mills parcels, what is that strip between them?
Is that? That's a really good question. And there's also on the Mill Hill parcel, you'll see a sort of a diagonal one. Those are fee ownerships. Those are fee corridors for a CMP. Yeah.
Kind of thought.
Edwards Mills also has an easement corridor with CMP that I don't believe shows up on the map. That's to the west of the fee corridor.
And they're on board with.
What is that Portland pipeline easement? And
That is the Portland pipeline. So that's the Portland Montreal pipeline.
okay,
Yeah.
and is that maintained? Do you have any concerns about that, or?
I have personal concerns about it, but not the land trust. It is maintained, yeah.
You haven't had any problems with that section of the pipeline? There haven't been any.
There haven't been any problems with that section of the pipeline, yeah.
Thank you, Lee.
Well, thank you all.
Okay, we're gonna move on to Reed Deadwater. I see Ryan Roosevelt from department is here. Are you giving this presentation? Oh, sorry.
Bethany and I are both gonna speak.
Sorry.
Morning, everybody. I'm Bethany Atkins. I'm the land acquisition biologist for the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. I'm joined today by my friend and colleague, Ryan Robichaud, who is our wildlife section supervisor. We are really pleased to be here today to be talking with you about IFNW's Reed Deadwater Juniper Brook Conservation Project. We're excited about this project for the incredibly rich and diverse habitat features here, for the significant recreational opportunities, all of which will be secured for the public as part of this project. At 6,318 acres, this will be the largest single parcel of land that the department has ever purchased. And if approved here today, it will almost double the acres of LMF investment within Aroostook County. The property includes more than 3,000 acres in the heart of a 9,000 acre deer wintering area. Under previous ownership, this property was managed under a cooperative agreement for deer management between a previous landowner and the department. Conservation of this property directly addresses the need for deer habitat protection as prioritized under LD 404, an act to conserve Maine's deer habitat. And it meets the IFNW criteria to identify priority deer wintering areas under LD 404, including its location in northern Maine, a size suitable to support deer, documented current use by deer or historic use by deer, and suitable cover and landscape context to support deer throughout the year. Brian will be talking a little bit more about deer habitat here in a minute. In addition to the high quality deer habitat, the project protects 2,500 acres of wetlands, about 1,000 of which are declining wetland types. Included within the wetland acreage are 1,500 acres in nearly all of Mucklehawk Bog, one of the most unique and diverse peatlands in Maine as identified by the Maine Natural Areas Program. Mucklehawk Bog includes 3 exemplary natural community types that are rare or uncommon in Maine. This includes an eccentric bog ecosystem, an entire dwarf shrub bog, and a sedge heath fen. The unique wetlands support known occurrences of state-threatened brook floater mussel, freshwater mussel species, Toma mayfly, which is known from a handful of sites in the state of Maine and 1 site in New York, and also special concern wood turtles. In addition, the property supports about 3,000 acres of habitat for wading birds and waterfowl. Together, the uplands and wetlands on this property support hundreds of species of greatest conservation need as identified in Maine State Wildlife Action Plan. The Reed Deadwater parcel is located in the Mucklehawk Stream Thompson Deadwater focus area of statewide ecological significance, and the property itself, if conserved, will protect 45% of that focus area, and together with the adjacent conservation land will protect nearly all of the focus area. An adjacent 48,000 acres of already conserved land stretches southward about 20 miles and includes BPL's Reed Plantation, the Reed Forest protected by the Forest Society of Maine, and IFNW's Mattawamkeag Wildlife Management Area. Together, these conserved lands create an important unfragmented landscape scale corridor for wildlife migration, for the protection of native biodiversity, and also they will together strengthen the region's resilience to climate change. In addition to the rich ecological features, there are some pretty spectacular recreational assets on this property. It's a popular site for hunting, fishing, trapping, canoeing, and includes a few miles of snowmobile trails right now. At present, the public uses on this property are by permission only, however. Under IFNW management, the department will approve hunting success in the northern part of the state. The property will be secured for upland bird hunting and for waterfowl hunting. There are approximately 13 miles of streams, which will be conserved for fishing opportunity on the property. Additionally, the property includes some pretty incredible wild and scenic navigable waters. There's some great pictures in your proposal here, none of which actually do this property justice in terms of how scenic it is. There is an informal water access site on Mucklehawk Stream that the department will be formalizing and improving here. There's also a recognized paddling trip on Wittapitlock Stream, which goes through the property. These opportunities are all within a very short drive of some of Maine's larger population centers. They're within an hour's drive from Lincoln, Holden, and Millinocket, and less than an hour and a half from the greater Bangor region. The resources here are under threat. They're in jeopardy. The property is owned by a commercial timber harvesting company right now. The property is also subject to a fiber supply agreement, to a lease for wind development, and the mineral rights are severed and owned by a different commercial organization. I wanted to give special appreciation and thanks due to Tom Duffus over here, you all heard about and from today already from the Conservation Fund for his work to pre-acquire this property on our behalf. Right now, a restricted use appraisal was completed in June and valued the property at $4.8 million. An environmental hazard assessment is underway and a survey are underway now. The Conservation Fund is under contract on the property with an anticipated closing in November of this year. And as soon as TCF closes, IFNW will update that appraisal to LMF standards and we'll move forward to completion. We're asking for $1.35 million in LMF funding to be matched with $3.45 million in U.S. Fish and Wildlife dollars through the John Robertson Fund, as well as some additional funds from our Deer Management Fund.
Bethany asked me to come and talk about the management approach the department may take if we're successful with this proposal. Again, I'm Ryan Robichaud. I'm the Wildlife Management Section Supervisor for Maine Fish and Wildlife. Part of my responsibility is oversight and administration and management of our state-owned wildlife management areas. As Bethany mentioned, this property will help achieve the goals and objectives outlined in LD 404 for the protection and enhancement of deer wintering habitat in northern, eastern, and western Maine. The property did meet the metrics outlined in our process to prioritize acquisition efforts throughout the state. And if this funding is awarded, this property would be incorporated into our state-owned wildlife management area system. This is in our administrative region F out of the Enfield office, and we'll manage the habitat here comprehensively to meet the deer habitat requirements throughout the course of the year. We do and would plan to incorporate this into our Pittman Robinson Wildlife Sport Fish Restoration Grant Program to provide the funding and resources necessary to adequately manage the property through time. With that, we bring staff capacity and resources to the table to effectively plan and implement our management objectives for the property. As an agency, we undertake a kind of two-tiered approach in terms of the management of our wildlife management areas. The first is a high-level document outlining the goals that we have. And the second is a more specific management objective document that allows us to achieve due diligence requirements for Section 7 compliance, NEPA, and other obligations under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Generally, we would look to maintain and enhance the wintering habitat conditions that are present on the property. Bethany spoke about the past historic cooperative agreement that we had with a large landowner, and we would look to enhance that cover component from the deer habitat perspective, but also look to enhance the hardwood browse component where that makes sense and is appropriate. We would also look to address and manage for access onto the property consistent with the department objectives.
Thanks, Ryan.
Any questions?
Any questions from the board for either Ryan or Bethany? Jim?
Yeah, when I look at, we've had some questions very similar. I look at who the former owner was and the whole naturalness question. I assume there was fairly severe harvesting that occurred on the property, and are you going to be able to accommodate that into your management plan?
That would certainly be a strong consideration for us, Jim. Our interpretation is that this property was initially harvested substantially due to spruce budworm salvage and pre-salvage harvest back in the mid-'80s. That age class component is now reaching an opportune time to enhance that condition for wintering shelter moving forward. So that shelter component is just coming online from those past harvests.
So this softwood regeneration as opposed to
Substantial.
gray birch.
Exactly, substantial. And talking with the staff that have been on the ground more so than I have, there's a lot of opportunity for pre-commercial thinning to both bring that cover along sooner, but also have a better control of species composition within the stand.
Bethany, you mentioned some issues with severed mineral rights and the timber supply agreement and something about wind. What's the status of those going forward, or would be under this?
Tom can feel free to chime in, but those were 3 items that were addressed during the title research, as the Conservation Fund has been working with a landowner to acquire the property. And Tom and the landowner have been working really hard to resolve the fiber supply, so they'll be shifting their fiber needs to other properties and to get this property moved from that wind release, and jump in if I'm speaking out of turn here. And then the mineral rights, there is a document being held in escrow that will return those rights back to this property. So
We're going to bring the mineral rights, the state and FV surface estate together and then convey to IFNW. Humpty Dumpty back together.
So that timber supply agreement generally is 30, 40 years. What's, you're going to be able to relieve this property to, of that responsibility?
It's a volume-oriented fire supply agreement, and they can move it to other properties.
I think that shows a real commitment on behalf of the landowner of this property now to, for an end conservation outcome of these particular lands.
I have a curiosity question and then a more serious question. But I was interested in those severed mineral rights. Is it confidential? Who got those mineral rights?
Usually they end up in Texas somewhere and it takes a long time to figure out how to get them released.
Really good question. With my sort of private hat on, I would say, keep it quiet publicly. I think if people would find through the chains of title that it's Brookfield.
My question is about the match, because you're waiting on a fairly hefty match. When do you anticipate hearing about that? And are you feeling confident that that's going to come through?
So the match that we'll be using is from PR, Pittman Robertson, which is funds that are allocated from federal government to the states on a formula. And so those funds are available for the state of Maine to use. It's a non-competitive grant. We just have to get permission from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services to how we use them. And so next week, we will be submitting our formal request for how to use those funds. We don't anticipate that there will be any issues. We'll have to go through all the same due diligence that we would with LMF in terms of an appraisal and appraisal review. It's a process we've been through hundreds of times before. So it's a little different than applying for a competitive.
I see. That's what I was concerned about. And so in terms of your timing, looking at closing, do you have any rough idea when all the due diligence and everything?
Yep. So I don't want to overpromise anything. But the Conservation Fund is going to be closing in November. And as soon as they close, we'll update that appraisal. So it's up to standards for our federal grant funders and also for LMF if we were to get an award. We're working through all the other due diligence, so we're hoping to be able to do a pretty quick turnaround once we get that appraisal in. So I'm guessing it'll be, late spring, summer time in which we would be able to close. And we want to make a quick turnaround on this so the Conservation Fund doesn't have to hold it on our behalf for too long. So thank you.
Bethany. Marion. Okay. Last one. Commissioner Keller has joined us. You want to say hello to the folks?
My apologies for being late. I had a family first situation, so glad to be here and glad to finally get to take a look and discuss some of these projects. So thanks, everybody. Judy's going to maintain the gavel. Thank you.
Okay, last project, Square Lake, Cross Lake. Liz, is that anyone else?
Last but not least.
Okay.
Good morning again, everybody. I'm Liz Petresco with the Bureau of Parks and Lands, and here to tell you a little bit about our Square Lake project, which will become our newest public reserve land. There are a lot of really wonderful things about the property, but before we get into details, I want to talk a little bit about its role as part of the state's public land system, which I think is an important part of why this is an important project for the Bureau. So in Maine, public lands are an incredibly important part of our outdoor tradition. They're almost part of who we are as Mainers. They encompass over 600,000 acres and include some of the state's most iconic visits. They're lands that are managed for multiple uses and offer a wide array of experience, from the Western Mountains to the rugged bold coasts to the fields and forests of northern Maine. We have places for quick and easy outings, and then some of the most remote, rugged, multi-day adventures that you can have throughout the state. Public lands are home to several hundreds of campsites. All of them are open and free to the public. And we also maintain hundreds of miles of trails for hiking, mountain biking, ATVing, and snowmobiling. Hunting, fishing, snowmobiling, camping, and many more recreation opportunities There are peak times in every season that really make public lands a year-round adventure. The Bureau manages public lands for multiple values. So when we think about how we're going to manage them, it's really the land base that dictates how we approach that. So we start by looking at the ecological sensitivity of the land along with wildlife considerations, making sure to offer special protections to those. Think about what sort of recreational opportunities can be provided for the public, and then look for opportunities for timber management. Timber harvesting on public lands can be used to improve the overall health of the forest. It can have ecological benefits, economic benefits, and then the revenue we generate from sustainable harvesting on public lands provides for the wide array of recreational benefits. The Square Lake property will be a really significant addition to the public reserve land system. It will connect 2 existing public lots and contribute to a 40,000 acre contiguous block of conservation land. The property includes over 4,000 acres of forest and provides access to miles and miles of shoreline for outdoor recreation. Its complementary ecological, recreation, and timber values really exemplify the Bureau's multiple use mandate. Some of the ecological features the property includes are over half. Can you go to the next slide? Over half of the 3,300 acre Cross Lake Fens focus area of statewide significance. 1,500 acres of significant habitat for wading bird and waterfowl, a rare pattern fen ecosystem with 2 exemplary natural communities, and then waterways that provide habitat for our oh so popular brook trout that seem to be everywhere. We're lucky. In terms of recreation, you can see that the project will provide access to more than 5 miles of undeveloped shoreline. And I didn't notice this when you sent me the slides, but the shape file here is wrong. So all of this shoreline is included. Not the developed part, but all of.
Say that again, Liz, sorry.
It is included. So that was like an earlier shape file we sent to MNEP, I think. Square Lake is the largest of the Fish River chain of lakes and supports fisheries of statewide significance for brook trout and landlocked salmon. Access to the lake is listed as a tier 1, the highest priority for inland fisheries and wildlife's water access priorities list. And it's been on that list for over 17 years. Staff in the IFNW office in Ashland say that they receive the most complaints on, it's the one water that they've received the most complaints on regarding the lack of suitable public access. So the Bureau is developing plans for a trailered public boat launch on the East Shore. Having that deep water launch with adequate parking will really benefit anglers from Aroostook County and across the state. And we'll be working together with staff from our boating division and staff at IFNW to develop plans for that launch. The project also fills a need for drive to waterfront campsites in the region. So you saw on the previous map that there are lots of conserved lands in the vicinity of this project, including our Eagle Lake unit, which has campsites, but those are only water access. So the ability here to provide vehicular access to campsites is a benefit. And with miles of undeveloped lake and stream shorefront, the property really offers extensive opportunities for water-based recreation. The lands have also been traditionally hunted for deer, moose, upland birds, and waterfowl, and the gravel woods road network provides good hunting access. In terms of timber management, the property is located in an area where forest products are really the mainstay of the economy. Over 5,000 jobs in Aroostook County are dependent on forest products industry. Wood from harvest on public lands supply more than 40 mills across the state, and the Bureau works with over 24 logging and road companies that provide jobs statewide. Keeping forest land in active production is really critical to the regional economy, and managing it, as you've talked about with other projects, in a sustainable manner is also really important. Since 2002, the Bureau's forest management has been dual certified under FSC and SFI, and our ability to manage on longer rotations really offers a chance to increase stocking and carbon storage and provide a market for high quality, favorable wood products that will store carbon long after the trees are harvested. The property's shorefront makes it very attractive for development, either as a private estate or for subdivision. As I just indicated, it took us quite a while to make heads or tails of what we were actually getting because of the original kind of carve up of this property for LUPC zoning. If not acquired by the Bureau, the future as a timber and recreation resource would be in doubt. The need for this project extends beyond the kind of proverbial hole in the donut. It will offer important protections to exemplary natural communities, link to existing public lots, and so consolidate management across the landscape, provide for longer rotation and sustainable forest management in support of the state's climate and carbon goals, and will result in more than 75% of Square Lake's shorefront being permanently protected. The Bureau has considered purchasing this property a few times over the last decades, and LMF funding is really critical for its success at this point in time. We have the opportunity now because we have a landowner that's willing to accommodate public funding timelines, a diversity of funding sources, and then very importantly, a mandate within the state to protect additional working lands in support of the state's climate action plan goals. We've submitted funding proposals to Land and Water Conservation Fund as well as NACA. And we expect that match funding to be in place in the spring. So we'd be looking at a closing in Q3 of the calendar year or the beginning of the fiscal year 2024. We've already had to scramble a bit. So in the budget you have in your packet, the overall project budget was $2.1 million. Since we submitted the proposal, we got our appraisal back at $2.5 million. Luckily, the landowner has agreed to meet us in the middle, and so will be giving us a $200,000 bargain sale. And we've been able to go back to one of our other funders who is able to accommodate an additional request for $200,000. So at this point in time, we don't need to modify our LMF request, but know that we've done everything we can to make as reasonable a request from you all as we can. Thank you for your consideration. Happy to answer any questions and hope you can help us support this project.
Any questions from the board?
So, Liz, it says Fish River chain of lakes. So for paddlers, can you go from Mud Lake to Cross Lake to Square Lake and then into Eagle Lake? Is that considered the chain of lakes?
That's a good question. And before I answer, I also want to acknowledge and thank Jerry Bly, who has been working with the Bureau on all aspects of this project. And maybe he can help me out with some of these answers. But I know that we have been through the thoroughfare between Cross Lake and Square Lake. And I believe you can, if the weather's right, get between Square Lake and Eagle Lake, but I don't know about the lakes above. Do you know?
Yes, you can, but you're going the wrong direction.
It depends on water levels and the type of watercraft you are in, but yes.
Because that's a recreational need that a lot of people enjoy, is the, like chain of ponds and the connectivity of through streams and brooks and things. And then the other question I have is, somewhere in here, you mentioned creating an ATV trail. So I'm wondering, there's a lot of fragile landscape in this, and that concerns me. And then I'm wondering, so Forest Society of Maine holds an easement in the land all around here. Did they permit ATVs on that land?
I don't remember what exactly their public access provisions are. I think they're pedestrian. And there's no major, this isn't providing a critical link, but it would be to just kind of generally provide some of the use on our land management roads, which we do on other public land units, and wouldn't be looking to kind of overlap ATV use on the sensitive features.
And I just think you have to be sensitive to Forest Society of Maine and be compatible with what they're doing too, because it could affect their land, so it's worth.
Yes.
Their lands are eased, right? They're not.
Conservation easement. And that's kind of one of the reasons why this parcel is so important, because that provides kind of more general limited pedestrian public access. This really provides us an opportunity to do a little more developed infrastructure like a boat launch and campsites. And so bring the resources that the Bureau has to not just kind of conserving the land, but really building this into a public land unit.
Thank you, Liz.
Thanks, everybody. And I just would like to, I don't know if this was mentioned, but I do just want to say that a few days ago, BPL submitted a letter of support from the county commissioners. So that might adjust your project structure scores.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I would like to provide an opportunity for members of the public to provide comment on any of the proposals. So if there's anybody that would like to speak, please go ahead and raise your hand online or in the room. Not seeing anybody in the room. Nor do I see anyone online, so we'll note that there were no public comments on the proposals. So now we're gonna take, I'm gonna suggest a 5-minute break. Sorry, had it 15 minutes down to 5 since we are tight on time. Unless I have any significant opposition to that, I think we need to keep moving.
So the break is to also give Jason time to, yeah,
Okay, so
integrate,
whenever
revise.
Jay's going, ready?
He's got it.
If anyone has revised scores, you can give them to Jason now.
Revised from what we sent in already?
That's right.
Okay,
Great. So I think a 5-minute break will work.
okay, great. So just take a 5-minute break then.
Yes,
Thank
Jason,
you
the
for
question
being
about
official.
some of the revisions, and he said,
I'm not
you
sure.
don't have to repeat it all, just make sure you
Individual.
just do it individually so that they don't have to go through them all. They're gonna go just make a change to just the one you corrected.
Revise. Yeah. But it doesn't look like anyone has any revisions, so I think we're good.
Okay, so take a 5-minute break and be back at 11:10.
I want to say hello.
She's really.
Jim, are you on your way to get coffee?
Are you taking
Already
that?
got No donuts.
Hi, so now I believe we need a motion.
I know.
Nope, not quite yet. We're almost there. I'm gonna try to go through these slides very quickly because we do have a limited time today. So again, just available funds, you'll recall $6.3 million in any particular fiscal year goes to conservation and recreation. We've got 2 fiscal years that we're looking at, 12.65 million. These are your allocations from round 10A and B. That leaves us $4.5 million available from fiscal year 22 and 23. We have requests at $5.8 million. So there's a difference of $1.3 million in excess of requests. We'll wait for Jerry to take his picture.
I did bring my notepad.
Executive session, just, the board has, very limited, abilities to enter into executive session. And that is for the discussion or consideration of, the acquisition of real or personal property. And we will go right to, while you're in executive session, you are, reviewing scores, you're reviewing other board considerations, deciding on preliminary funding allocations. And,
We need to do the
we need to do the scoring.
in open.
Yeah.
Scoring's gotta be.
We're gonna do scoring first.
All right, so
Sorry.
I'm going to share my scoring spreadsheet and.
Yep.
Really run through this.
So we're gonna start with going the same order. Yep. And just so folks know, when we do enter executive session, the audience members will need to leave the room and then we'll let you know when we're out and you can come back. Okay, Jason, I'm gonna have you, you've got the spreadsheet, so you can run through these.
Okay. So what I've done here, in the past, we have, when there was no issue with the average board score, we have said that will be the consensus score unless somebody raises their voice and objects. What I've done here is I've highlighted anything that needs any discussion at all. Usually that's an issue where it's not an allowed score under the workbook. So, what I should have done is copied all this over previously, but let's see here. There we go. All right, so we have 2 things on chat. This is Chadbourne. 2 things that need discussion. First, water access. The additional land assets needs to go either up to a 4 or down to a 2. So somebody make a suggestion.
Go ahead, Jim.
I went with a 4. Feel that there was.
Yeah, I would certainly support a 4, with all of the frontage on the Androscoggin River and the Ellis River, and I think it's.
Okay, do we have consensus for a 4? Good.
And then climate, just very briefly, somebody had given it points, most people had not. Is everybody in agreement that this can be a 0 on climate, or somebody want to make the case for giving it those 5 bonus points?
And that is a case where it's either 0 or
0 or
5.
5.
That's correct.
And I think the data.
Board, good.
Okay, 1 down. On to Kennebago Woodlands. This one's proximity. Sarah, do you want to explain the difference between a 7 and an 8 on the proximity?
So the way that the scoring criteria is currently written, you have choices of numbers of different examples. And if you hit one criteria, you're an 8. And if you hit another criteria, the wording is a bit confusing and challenging. I think,
So 7 points means you have met 2 to 4 of the proximity criteria. 8 points means you have met 5 or more of the proximity criteria. So that difference between staff had counted up and said, we think it means 4.
But the average board score was an 8, which is required to meet 5. So the question is, I guess, did it?
I'm looking for my.
So I guess I would suggest if the average board score was an 8, then we leave it as an 8.
Go with it.
Yeah.
Leave it as an 8
We can do that.
and then move on.
There was nothing else here that needed any consideration. On to Mill Hill. Okay, so Mill Hill just has a number of these additional land assets that need to either go up or down. And let's start with rare, threatened, and endangered.
So again, this has to be 2, 4, or
Yes,
6, right?
yes, so the average board score is a 1, so it can either go down to 0 or up to 2.
Out of 0.
I'm 0.
Hearing no consensus, so I make the case that for what the consensus should be.
I think Jim suggested 2. I'm good with 2.
Yeah, can't be a 1, right?
And this, and the staff had recommended
Right.
2 as well.
A couple of zeros earlier, does somebody want to make the case that that should be the consensus, or is everybody okay with 2?
It's not worth arguing.
Yeah.
Right, scenic interest and natural features, again, down to 2 or up to 4.
Good with 4.
And 2.
I have 2.
Unless there's a difference of 2 or 3 points between our average and the board score.
Yeah.
Right, it's not worth.
I agree. I think that's what I was thinking, that we're nitpicking here and it's not going to change the outcomes at the end of the day.
average is a 3, then go to a 4.
Right. I understand it's not consistent with the scoring as it is listed out, but it is the median. So at the end of the day, does that matter?
I think we're required to, it is required that the consensus score be,
An eligible score.
yes.
Right.
So the consensus score has to be either a 2
then
or a
I
4,
propose
just to
we-
satisfy the RFP process.
Go with the 4.
All the 3s to 4s,
Exactly.
as the staff had allocated.
And the 4 to 5
And the
under
4 to
public
5
water
is
supply.
allowable under the extra credit points.
Yeah, that's
Good
good.
with everybody?
Let's change that to next RFP.
Okay.
On to the Deadwater.
Again, we could, yes, it's 6, follow the same process. Yeah.
Okay, we
We're so
did
close.
have one board member who thought this project warranted 20 bonus points for single exceptional value.
That was me because of the rare unique habitat on there that he.
So we have 2 projects with, where a board member has suggested using single exceptional value. I would suggest maybe we have that conversation with those 2 projects together.
Sure, I mean,
Use-
really, it's got a score of 101, so I'm not super fussy about it. It's got a really good score. It's a great project. I'm not gonna argue too heavily,
Okay.
so I'm fine letting it go.
That off
Barring
there.
the 101.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Huh?
So on to Rare Lake, which has the same issue with proximity. It sounded like everybody was happy with just leaving that as an 8 last time. Only thing with ecological preserve was not eligible for points because there's a special management requirement for this one.
What's that?
I'm sorry, so on the additional land assets. We had probably.
Give it points for ecological reserve. It's not being
Oh.
managed as an
Okay,
ecological
okay, so,
reserve,
yes.
so it's not eligible.
So just on the farmland and open space, the average board was a 5. The staff score was a 4, was the consensus then to go going up on all of them or going to the staff score on all of them, I guess is what we.
I'd go to the staff score. It's not that different.
I was wondering this because this is close to a lot of towns in Aroostook County, which is really important, you know, so I think it deserves a 6.
Well, in the moment, you're going to hear an argument for 20.
Okay, let's give it a 6. Fine with me. Anyone opposed to that?
And this river trail system. Staff gave it 0, but some board members want to give it 2, I believe, so you want to go down to 0 or up to 2 here? Here, nobody's saying 0, so let's go up to 2.
Yes.
All right.
You're going the right way though.
Yeah.
Climate, again, is all or nothing. Everybody okay with going to 0 there? And I understand we're about to hear an argument for 20 points.
I was the one who made that, and I had 3 considerations. One, the rare pattern fence, I could wax eloquent for way too long about what special things pattern fence are, how rare, and this is one of the best, if not the best example in the state. The second is our representation, and this is something that doesn't really figure in our normal scoring, but we all know that Aroostook County is underrepresented as a political entity. The Aroostook Hills and Lowlands as an ecoregion is equally underrepresented in terms of LMF projects and land protection activities in general. So that's a big consideration for me. And third, this business of 5 miles in shorelines, lakeshore, sitting in the middle of a conservation hole in the donut halfway between Caribou Presque Isle and on one end and Fort Ken in the other. The threat here is enormous. This place is going to be developed if it is not actively conserved. No question about it. Maybe not tomorrow, but certainly it won't take long for it to happen. So those 3 reasons. When I looked at this score, when I looked at this project, if I hadn't seen any scores at all, I'd put it as roughly equivalently attractive to the Reed Deadwater. But its score is way lower. And the one way that I could see to rectify it is 20 extra points.
Score. I asked this question once before, result because we made a switch in terms of, collectively made a switch to a change in major land use.
The score increased as a result of the change in major land asset.
Right.
That was why we recommended it, because we felt like the score that it received through the original land asset didn't really reflect the values. So that was our recommendation to the applicant and the board, just to change the land asset to boost the need and the significance of the resource that was being scored.
I can support Matt's argument for 20 as well.
I'm not convinced, but.
I'm not either. My feeling was that kind of the underlying story in that application is the seller, if they had an opportunity to develop it, would have. But I think because of regulations, they can't do it in a timely manner. And this is their plan B.
Any other thoughts?
Which is not to say I don't think it's a great acquisition.
Is it possible to ask why the staff didn't choose? I'm placing a lot of emphasis on the staff's more careful look at than me and perhaps even the abilities, but why the staff didn't choose to go that route?
The single exceptional value. Mm-hmm. I would say my philosophy on single exceptional value is that it's really rarely invoked. And it's really about a single exceptional value rather than, so if you look at our statutes, it tells the board that we must prioritize either projects with multiple values or a project with a single exceptional. And this didn't rise, it has great multiple values. It seemed to fit that category better than a single exceptional value.
I will acknowledge, I don't like the category single exceptional value. It doesn't quite work for me. And in truth, my argument depends not on it. The single exceptional value in this case would be the pattern fence. And unless you all have been in a pattern fen and see how extraordinary the flex and other features are, it's hard to make a case. But to be honest, if you listen to my second and third criteria, they were kind of going down into the digging up the other board considerations, which we're not allowed to score. But
there's a reason for that. It seems, why over time we haven't been allowed to make, or haven't chose to expand how we're doing it to reflect, well, it's a rustic county versus Cumberland.
And I think those kinds of considerations can certainly come in as you're thinking about funding, that, part of your funding decision is geographic distribution of element investments.
Those are the.
It will on my part.
But we did, Mac, we just came up to 6 where we could for open space, which is that connectivity of communities and open space. So we've just gone up to the max on that, which addresses one of your points. Correct. Heuristic to the communities.
I guess it's a square peg in a round hole.
It's a great project. And
I think it's one of the best projects we've looked at all year.
it's a great project.
I'm hoping that through the process of allocation and awarding that becomes a moot point.
This is a challenging, but it's in statute. It's in statute that's a single exceptional value. And the only time that I've been on the board that we've used it is that $1 million view.
Yeah.
And okay.
That works for you.
Enough said.
Laura, did you have something you wanted to add?
Just once the discussion of single exceptional value is done, I do just want to remind the board to maybe reconsider the project structure criteria, given the letter of support from the county.
Okay, so
Yeah.
where is that?
So this would be right here on project structure, that the difference between the only difference between 0 and 3 there is a letter of support from the county or the municipality. So they would be eligible for 3 points there
Okay.
with that letter of
And
support.
that's why you guys didn't give it.
Right.
That's
So
what
we
we
could
got,
add 3 there.
Sorry, I assume that had been corrected.
No, we just got it. Yeah,
All
we
right,
just
so
got
let's
it.
add the 3 in for
Okay,
that.
so the 3
And
there.
on that. I guess my feeling is that I think it's a great project, but I think even Max, you sort of alluded to the fact that you thought it should have scored higher than it did, so you allocated it 20 points here, and I'm not sure that rises to the single exceptional value in my mind. I think this is a lot of really good values, but not one that's comparable, say, to the $1 million view. I think right now it's looking at a score of 86, which is pretty great. So. I
It'll
think
be
my
83
gut
without
recommendation
that
would be
3
to go
sitting
with,
there.
what's that?
It'll be 83 without the single exceptional value points.
Okay, yep, so 83.
Possibly 80. Rounding,
84
sorry,
with the-
round, these numbers are being rounded because of the averages. So,
Right, but you just added in the 3, so
yeah,
I think it would stay at 84, right?
yes.
Could vital ecological values be bumped up to 6 because of the rare and patterned pen? Is there any argument for any other areas to increase those?
I think the balance there, I think the answer is yes. And I think the balance that was there when staff were looking at it is rare and endangered, and then looking at vital ecological functions value. So they bumped it up high for rare and endangered. That was the justification because of the rarity of it. But I think the board could legitimately discuss bumping up vital ecological functions and values as well.
Do it.
Because I think Mac makes a good point about the rare pattern fen being the largest in the state. And so I think that, yeah.
All right, so is everybody comfortable moving that value to a 6 and then leaving the single exceptional value at?
Well, it changes nothing because that's already maxed out. It's 25 points for additional land access, so it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Max out at 25 and a recognition that they're above 25.
Yeah. Okay, so everybody supportive of the score, final score of 84?
Okay.
Okay. All right. That's the last.
So now we will flip back to the PowerPoint slides and read the motion to enter executive session.
So moved.
So I'll just read the motion in accordance with Title 1, Chapter 13. The board will enter into executive session to select finalists and make preliminary financial allocations. Executive session is used to ensure the board's preliminary financial allocations do not include prejudice. It's competitive or bargaining positions to the applicants. So it asks all members of the public to leave the room and we'll come get you shortly.
But could it vote?
Okay, I need to vote. Everybody in favor?
Yeah.
The other? No.
I'm gonna stop recording right here. Okay, stop recording, thank you. Where did
Judy, would you like us to?
session? Started recording and the recording is in process. Welcome back, everyone from the public. And I think we are ready to move on our preliminary allocations. I would entertain a motion.
I move the following projects have received a preliminary allocation of $5,845,500 of LMF Conservation and Recreation Funds. Chadbourne Tree Farm, Kennebago, Mill Hill Forest, Reed Deadwater, and Square Lake.
Second.
Second that.
Seconded by Jim. Any discussion on the motions? Call the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous. The board votes, and I'll read it again, to support preliminary allocations of $5,845,500 of LMF Conservation and Recreation Funds to the 5 projects proposed. Congratulations. I think that. I'd be curious to know for staff if we could just get the proposed match to those projects so that when we talk about it publicly, we can say there's $5 million of state money garnering however much money, public or other support in a total acreage. Yeah, that'd be great. And you had some summary in our notes somewhere that had like how many acres that was.
Yeah. We have already started a draft press release. We'll circulate it to your agencies and get all that
Awesome.
in there and out to the governor's office.
Okay, so we are not done our work. For the board, we're gonna keep moving.
All right.
So just a reminder, folks, that applicants will be notified in writing regarding their selection as a finalist and the board's preliminary allocation of LMF funds to their project. Until that time, board allocations remain confidential. Applicants may request a verbal report from the director following the end of today's meeting. Thank you.
All right, now we need to move on to project approvals. So it is 10 of 12. We're going to go to 12:30. And we have a slew of projects to approve. We're going to get through just as many as we can. And it's important for the board to understand, if we don't get to a vote, it delays the project. And so being as efficient as we can with this and getting through as many as possible would be fabulous, so that all of these projects can move forward.
So who's gonna?
I will start. Caribou Stream is mine. So Caribou Stream, deer wintering area in Washburn and Woodland, Aroostook County. This is 2 parcels totaling just over 916 acres. This is a fee acquisition by IF&W. This is the protection of deer wintering habitat in IF&W priority area of northern Maine. We've got 2 miles of intact riparian buffers and associated wetlands. It provides habitat for brook trout. And a third of the Aroostook County population lives within 10 miles of this project. IFNW will be managing this property to ensure public use is compatible with deer habitat management. And for all the beautiful pictures that were in the Reed Deadwater project, Caribou Stream was a challenge to come up with pretty good pictures.
There's even a deer in any of them.
So I have condensed these slides. So we have the AOC recommendation and the draft motion warrant on this slide.
So the appraisal.
I move to approve the recommendation of the LMF Appraisal Oversight Committee and accept the appraiser's value of $458,000.
Second that.
And so is this one of those years that we don't actually have to vote because the appraisal committee?
You don't need a second for the appraisal committee.
Okay, so we have a motion and then any discussion on the motion? All right, so all those in favor of approving the recommendation of the LMF Oversight Committee to accept the applicant appraised value of $458,000? Aye?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed?
I move we confirm the allocation of 229,000 in LMF conservation and recreational funding. Support the acquisition subject to standard conditions.
Second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Just to note that the public notice was published.
Okay, great.
Usually we read that, but that's okay. No comments.
All right. All those in favor? Aye. Unanimous for those online.
Wonderful. On to the
Great.
next project.
Stand down.
Okay. I have the clicker.
You can have a clicker, but start talking.
So, never mind, I'll use Flora's laptop this piece. So the Kennebago Headwaters project, not to confuse with Kennebago Woodlands project, which was approved in around 10A last January, is now here for final approval. This particular piece of the project is 1,717 acres, fee acquisition by Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust. And this is the portion of the larger project that includes the actual Kennebago River main stem and associated wetlands and riparian areas. And this piece has actually been pre-acquired by Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust. So once we do the final award and they've submit all of their due diligence, we'll be able to reimburse them for that. So the AOC met and accepted the appraised value of $2,480,000 for that parcel, and we have a draft motion.
Move to approve the recommendation of the LMF Appraisal Oversight Committee and accept the appraiser's value of $2,480,000.
Okay, so any discussion on that motion? Any opposition to the motion? Seeing none, the motion carries.
And notice was published, no comments were received. So we have the second draft motion.
So can you just do that announcement to the public?
I'm sorry. Yes, the public notice for this project was advertised in the Kennebec Journal and the Lewis and Sun Journal on September 13th, and no comments were received.
I move we confirm the allocation of $1 million in LMF conservation and recreational funding to support the acquisition subject to standard conditions for the Kennebago Headwaters project.
There a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Any opposition to the motion? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously.
Next project.
Next project.
This one is also mine. Two parcels, the Great Pond Mountain Wildlands expansion. Fee acquisition by Great Pond Mountain Conservation Trust. Again, both parcels have been pre-acquired. The two parcels are going to expand the existing preserve and add some summits and exposed ledges where trails can be developed, and also water frontage on the Dead River and Alamance Lake. And the appraisal oversight committee met in September and accepted the value of $1,119,000 for the two parcels combined. So that's the total. And we have the draft motion.
Move to approve the recommendation of the LMF Appraisal Oversight Committee and accept the appraiser's value of $1,119,000.
Okay, we have a motion. Any discussion on the motion? Any opposition to the motion? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously.
And public notice for this project was advertised in the Kennebec Journal and the Bangor Daily News on September 13th. No comments were received.
Okay.
We have the second motion.
Good job.
I move to confirm the allocation of $264,972 in LMF conservation and recreation funding to support the acquisition, subject to standing conditions.
Have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Any opposition to the motion? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously. Move on to Searsmont.
Okay, next up is the Searsmont McClellan property in the town of Searsmont. It would be the acquisition just under 64 acres. This project is located in the center of Searsmont Village and abuts the community building and contains about 1,200 feet of Georges River frontage. One thing to note about this project is that it is under contract for more than the appraised value. But the initial LMF award represents 50% of that appraised value, and the town of Searsmont has enough money to cover the extra. So right to the draft motion, if you like.
To approve the recommendation of the LMF Appraisal Oversight Committee and accept the appraiser's value of $205,000.
Okay, we have a motion. Any opposition to the motion? Or sorry, any discussion on the motion? Okay, none. Any opposition to the motion? None. The motion carries unanimously.
Public notice for the Searsmont McClellan project was advertised in the Kennebec Journal and the Bangor Daily News on September 13th, 2022. No comments were received. And here is draft motion number 2 for you.
I move to confirm the allocation of $102,500 in LMF conservation and recreational funding to support the acquisition, subject to standard conditions.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. Any opposition to the motion? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously. Move on to Whitney Forest.
Okay, Whitney Forest, 370 acres, fee acquisition by the Frenchman Bay Conservancy. This is a large area of open space and trails adjacent to Ellsworth High School and in town Ellsworth. And one note on this, the preliminary allocation was 283,000. The appraisal came in a little bit low, so the final allocation for this project would be 235,000. There is also a request that we'll get to, assuming if we have time after we finish the final awards, to allow that remaining $48,000 to be used to add a parcel to the project. So just keep that in mind. And the AOC accepted the appraised value of $470,000 for this parcel. So we have the first draft motion.
I move to approve the recommendation of the LMF Appraisal Oversight Committee and accept the appraiser's value of $470,000.
Okay, we have a motion. Any discussion?
Just a quick question. This is not including the 48,000 for the other parcel. This is
This is just on their.
just the allocation.
Yep.
Right? It confused me with that.
The board will first vote for the final allocation of 235,000 to the 370 acre parcel that we have the appraisal for. Then time permitting, the board will later vote on whether to allow the project to be amended by adding this new parcel.
Okay, so that's a totally separate discussion.
Totally separate.
Yeah.
Right now,
Thank you.
just.
So I may have made that more complicated than it needed to be.
Okay. Okay. We have a motion.
We do have a
We do have a
motion,
motion.
have discussion.
And any opposition to the motion? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously.
Public notice for Whitney Forest was advertised in the Kennebec Journal and the Bangor Daily News on September 13th. No comments were received.
I move we confirm the allocation of $235,000 in LMF Conservation and Recreation funding to support the acquisition, subject to standard conditions.
Motion, is there a second?
A second.
Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, any opposition to the motion? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously. Next, on the next bog.
Next up is Bonnie Beg, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, Mountain Property, which would be a fee acquisition project by the town of North Berwick, 61 acres. Would complete the conservation of the 3 Bonnie Beg mountain summits, offers a variety of recreational opportunities, and is located within a focus area. The Appraisal Oversight Committee met on September 12th to discuss this appraisal. The appraisal reported a value of $365,000. The committee accepted the appraised value of $365,000. And draft motion.
I move to approve the recommendation of the LMF Appraisal Oversight Committee and accept the appraiser's value of $365,000.
Okay, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, any opposition to the motion? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously.
Public notice for the Bonnie Beg Mountain Project was advertised in the Kennebec Journal and the Portland Press Herald on September 13th, 2022. No comments were received.
And we confirm the allocation of $181,700 in LMF Conservation and Recreational funding to support the acquisition, subject to standard conditions.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. We have a motion. Is there a second? Seeing none, any opposition to the motion? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously.
Oh, thank you.
Rankin. All right.
All right, Porter Hills. This is 567 acres total across 5 parcels, 2 of which will be donated as match parcels, 3 of which will be purchased with LMF funds. This includes exposed ledges and summits with scenic views of the White Mountains and surrounding area. Some wetland areas, as you can see, some rare natural communities, and both motorized and non-motorized trails on these 5 parcels. So the AOC met and accepted the total appraised value of $861,000 for the 5 parcels. We have the first draft motion.
Move to approve the recommendation of the LMF Appraisal Oversight Committee and accept the appraiser's value of $861,000 for the 5 parcels.
Okay, we have a motion. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, any opposition to the motion? Seeing none, that also carries unanimously.
Public notice for Porter Hills was advertised in the Kennebec Journal and the Portland Press Herald on September 13th. No comments were received, so we have the second draft motion.
I move to confirm the allocation of $388,000 in LMF conservation and recreational funding to support the acquisition, subject to standard conditions.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, any opposition to the motion? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously. Whitney Forest.
Okay, so that gets us through all of our
Yeah.
appraisal approvals and final allocations for those projects. And a big giant thank you to the AOC, because that was a lot of work on top of the proposals that you were reviewing this time around. Prior to your acceptance of new projects today, the AOC had worked through half of the projects selected between A and B. You now have, oh, I don't know, 12 more new appraisals coming your way, so your dial has gone back. But
It should
We
be
know-
noted that we completed this work shorthanded, so.
that's right. Mr. Norris was not available.
Thank you for bringing that up.
So kudos to the AOC, and I expect that we will have more meetings like this where we have to just get through a whole lot of final approval, so just be prepared for that. Now we can move on to a couple of project amendment requests. And typically, anytime a project looks to swap out parcels or is going to change by, more than 10%, they come back to the board for their approval. So that's why these are coming back to you. And Jason can take it away.
The first one up is Whitney Forest. The request in your board packet to add the 62-acre Jordan parcel, which is highlighted in green on this map, adjacent to the original parcel, which is the large red area. Oops, wrong. Yes, this complete. So adding this parcel will increase the project area from 370 acres to 432 acres, making more additional land available for trails and outdoor recreation and protect additional forest and wetland area. And because the appraisal on the original parcel came in a little bit lower than expected, adding this parcel will represent a reallocation of the preliminary request for any new LMF funding. So when the board is ready, there's a draft motion, but feel free to ask questions or discuss.
So this parcel would come in, if you accepted it, the parcel appraisal would come in and follow the entire typical process. So you would review this appraisal and have an opportunity to approve it or reject it and make a final allocation through that process as well.
Do we know any of the values of this additional property or?
I believe that was in the package. I don't remember off the top. My understanding is that it was less than $100,000 was the estimated value. Significantly.
It assumed the same appraisal value. In terms of the ecological or recreational values, I think it's more of the same essentially.
Yeah. This is the project, it's adjacent to the high school in Ellsworth. And it will have a trail system.
Just so I understand, if there wasn't another parcel, then the preliminary allocation would have been reduced.
It was reduced.
It
Or
was.
you voted on that earlier in the meeting.
Right.
So
This will require a new motion to add it back in. What they're saying is that it's based on the preliminary allocation, it would be the same, not on our actual allocation that we made pursuant to the appraisal.
Yes.
yes,
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay.
So this would just allow them to access the full initial award.
Yep, you got it. So we have a draft motion. Anyone wanna?
About this? Or-
I move to allow the addition of the Jordan parcel to the Whitney Forest project, subject to standard conditions with no change to the preliminary LMF award of $283,000 for the project.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion?
So because we're referencing the preliminary LMF award, that means depending on what the appraisal is on this new parcel, it could either fit within that or not.
Or the board could choose to allocate more money,
Or less?
depending on the appraisal.
lower.
Yep. So this is you've made an award to a project which has 2 parcels. You've approved 1 parcel, you will approve the second parcel. Does that make sense?
It does. I guess I don't really understand why we reference the preliminary allocation because it's almost a whole new.
I think just so that there's an understanding that they're not being approved to go above what we had originally.
Unless we so choose at a subsequent.
Be an amendment to the.
It's also an attempt to not have to bring this in under a new RFP. You know, that's sort of the alternative is we could have made them come back and a future RFP and apply, and this is. Since they have an existing project. Yep.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Any opposition to the motion? Motion carried unanimously. Great. Last one, I think.
Last one. North Deering in Portland, again, has the opportunity to add an adjacent parcel to the project that wasn't available at the time of the original proposal. In this case, it is the 4-acre parcel on the east that is the orange hatched area. That's the 410 Auburn Street parcel. And the benefits of adding this parcel, in addition to the additional acreage, is it provides a connection to Auburn Street and allows public access from that east side. And in this case, they are requesting that their preliminary award be increased to accommodate that addition. They're requesting an additional 162,500, which would take the preliminary award from 279,000 to 441,500. So there's a draft motion.
So that will put us further in the red.
This is allocating additional funds.
Yeah. So what's that difference there? Like
162,500. That's the addition that they're asking for.
4 acres.
It's like $80,000 an acre. I stumble over that.
And just for background on this, TPL was able to acquire this.
It was an opportunity that became available to them after submitting the application.
And so they have acquired it. It's a pre-acquisition.
I don't know if that's correct. Has this been pre-acquired?
This is not pre-acquired.
It is Portland, I mean.
Yeah, the risk of development is
my
significant.
And this would require another appraisal.
Absolutely, yeah. This was one where staff felt because it's an additional request. This is one where we were kind of on the fence of, do we suggest that it come in under a future RFP or follow this approach? So I think either one is a legitimate option for the board to consider.
And who is the current owner then of this?
Private individual.
Yeah.
There's a letter.
Yeah, the letter,
There's a letter.
it's a couple.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I would go with I favor the future request option. It gives the TPL more time to develop other funding. Maybe they can come back with a better than 50-50 match. Portland is, I mean, you understand why the land is expensive in a place like Portland, but it's also a place of a lot of wealth. They should be able to find local funding to help significantly.
Do you have any sense this is time sensitive in any way? In other words, if we don't act today,
Right, once our next sellers RFP.
In November, you will discuss adopting a workbook and issuing an RFP. Next meeting in November.
So we don't even have a date for our next RFP.
No, right, nothing official.
Is there anyone here from this project?
Let's see Phil on
See that Phil is here.
Can I make a comment? I think one of the things to think about in terms of like encouraging them to apply for a future round is how will like a small additional parcel to the whole kind of score in relation to kind of bigger projects that are competing. You know, at just 4 acres, its main value at that point becomes just the access and will it kind of get enough points to kind of bring it up to compete with other projects at that point.
It's a really good consideration.
Do some math here. I think they're asking for a 40% increase in the original project budget.
Right. Yeah.
4 acres of.
Before.
Significant.
Of 28 acre.
Yeah. I would lean.
Not all acres created.
It is big. It's right in the middle of town. And if we went ahead today with this, it still has to have an appraisal. We still have to come back and approve an allocation for it. So we had 2 more bites at this. And, you know, I think these things are always time sensitive when you have a lot right in the middle of Portland. And I guess I, for one, think we ought to go forward with it, knowing we have two more steps that we could determine that it was not worthy, either based on the appraisal or based on subsequent information.
I'm anxious to see the appraisal, to be honest, for the disparities we just talked about, that, 40% of it for 10% of the property.
Jim, a little bit back, a portion of the original project had already been kind of restricted as green space in a prior development. So it appraised very low on that basis compared to what you might expect for in-town Portland.
So there was an easement of sorts.
There was some development restriction in place on part of it already.
4 acres.
Not this 4 acres, part of the original project. So the per acre price of the original project was maybe already a bargain because there were some existing restrictions.
So is there,
So I think a couple options. You could vote to allow the addition without committing any additional funds and wait, as Barbara said, or you could vote to allow the addition and set some preliminary funding that you then revisit once you have an appraisal.
I'd be inclined to agree with Mag that this is a pretty significant addition to the project, and that we ought to address it separately.
I don't think it's gonna compete separately. It's not gonna compete. It's not gonna compete 4 acres, a 4 acre addition. I don't think it's gonna be competitive compared to a lot of the other projects. It is Portland. There's not tons of open space in that area, and I personally think it's important we provide access to people close to where they live. So $80,000 an acre in the Portland area is actually, honestly, I sold a third of an acre in Freeport like 10 years ago for $30,000. So, the housing market is through the roof in this area. So I'm not convinced waiting is gonna benefit. I guess if I would feel more comfortable, even and let it compete if we had, say, that we're gonna have a next round in January, but since we don't even have the next round established yet, the next RFP round, I'd push to your second option there, Sarah, approve a motion, and contingent on what the appraisal comes in at. Jim, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say the same thing.
So without any amount of money specified.
Yeah, I lean towards a different round myself. I feel like we're spending a lot of money for an access point from another road.
There's already 2 access points there. They have vehicular and pedestrian.
Yeah.
So this will be a third access, but it's on an opposite street, but still, there is 2 points of access. I would prefer to see it go to another round, just because we're already in the negative. And
It's not just an access point, though. It's 4 acres, 4.2 acres. So significantly increases the green space right in the middle of this intense dense Portland neighborhood.
In the spirit of compromise, I can accommodate another round.
I would support Judy's take on this, which is to move ahead and knowing again that this isn't a final decision, that we have the appraisal and then we have an allocation decision.
I think we probably need a motion and a vote to get it.
I'll make a motion that we push the North Deering Park to a next round of funding.
I second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Anybody in opposition to the motion? Opposition. That's what you told me to do. Okay, motion carries. So this project will be encouraged to apply in the next round.
All right, that's all of our business. Nice work, So we do have a board meeting coming up November 29th. And that is when we'll be talking about our workbook. We have a committee meeting tomorrow to look at the changes in scoring, potential changes in scoring. And we'll be bringing any recommendations to the board at that November meeting. And we do have an appraisal oversight committee meeting scheduled for October 25th and holding a potential November date as well, depending on how many appraisals show up on our doorstep. Yeah, we'll see. It's not looking like that yet.
Sarah, when we hand in our sheets, we're gonna get these back, correct? That's our name is on them.
No, your name is on them so that if procurement has any questions about who is here, we know who it was.
So you do need those even if we send, okay.
Yes, preferably we would have your scores, your scoring pages.
I just wanted to thank the LMF staff. My wife had fairly significant surgery a couple weeks ago, and I want to thank the staff for caring and sending her the flowers. And one of them even showing up to babysit dogs and her last night. Just wanted a little thought of appreciation. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So I asked for flowers that would die.
I
have the wrong age to
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah, so we've got some six.
Good thing.
All right.
We've got 6 more weeks of.
We are adjourned.
Yeah.
Thank you.